Hello, I'm Arthur Reed. Welcome to the World War II History Channel, where we explore the pivotal moments and untold stories of the greatest generation. There is a particular kind of silence that falls just before the world changes forever. It is not an empty silence. It is heavy, like a breath held in the chest, waiting for the exhale. If you were to stand on the edge of the southern English coast in the high summer of that year, you might have thought you had stepped into a painting. The grass was an impossibly bright, vibrant green, warmed by a generous sun. The waters of the Channel, that narrow stretch of sea that has defined so much of history, were calm. They rippled and sparkled under the vast, unbroken canopy of a clear blue sky. It was a beautiful summer. Perhaps, looking back, it was too beautiful. The kind of summer where you want to do nothing more than lie back in the tall grass, listen to the bees moving lazily from clover to clover, and watch the white, cotton-like clouds drift aimlessly overhead. But the air carried a different weight. Across that sparkling water, just 20 miles away, the coast of France had gone perfectly, terribly quiet. The towns and villages of Europe had been swallowed by a shadow that was now stretching its long, dark fingers toward the white chalky cliffs of Dover. The people of the island knew it. The fishermen who mended their nets on the pebbled beaches knew it. They would pause in their work, their rough, salt-worn hands going still, and cast their eyes toward the horizon. They were looking for something they did not want to see. They were listening for a hum that did not belong to the bees. Inland, scattered across the rolling hills and flat pastures, were the aerodromes. From a distance, they looked peaceful. Tents pitched on the grass, wooden huts sitting quietly in the sun, and the sleek, silent shapes of aeroplanes resting on the turf like silver and green birds sleeping in the afternoon heat. But if you drew closer, you would find the boys. It is so easy to look back through the lens of history and see them as statues, as monuments to bravery carved from marble and steel. But in those quiet, sun-drenched afternoons, they were simply boys. They were 19, 20, perhaps 21 years old. Some of them still had the soft, rounded cheeks of childhood. They wore uniforms that sometimes looked a little too big for them, the ruffles scratching at their necks. They smelled of leather, canvas, engine oil, and the faint, sweet scent of the peppermint candies they kept in their pockets to calm their stomachs. They spent hours doing nothing but waiting. And waiting, they found, was its own kind of exhaustion. Imagine sitting in a canvas deck chair outside a dispersal hut. The sun is warm on your face. A gramophone in the corner of the room behind you is playing a scratchy, slow, melancholy jazz tune. The record skips slightly, a familiar rhythm. Beside you, a friend is sleeping, his cap pulled down over his eyes, his breathing slow and even. Another is absent-mindedly tossing a cricket ball from hand to hand, the soft thud-thud-thud against his palm the only percussion to the afternoon. And there, sitting cross-legged on the dry earth, is another boy, writing a letter. He uses a cheap fountain pen, and the ink smudges slightly on the thin paper. He writes to his mother in a quiet village hundreds of miles to the north. He doesn't write about the quiet. He doesn't write about the way his heart beats a little faster every time the telephone on the desk rings. Instead, he tells her that the weather is exceptionally fine. He tells her that the food at the mess hall is surprisingly good, though not nearly as good as her Sunday roast. He asks if the dog is well, and if the roses in the front garden have bloomed yet. He pours all his love, all his longing for the simple, beautiful ordinary things, into those blue ink lines. He folds the paper carefully, creating a tiny, fragile bridge between the world of the aerodrome and the world of home. He slides it into an envelope, sealing away his private fears, presenting only the quiet resilience of a son who wants to protect his mother from the very things he is about to face. These quiet moments are the tapestry of history. When we think of these young men sitting in the summer grass, it is sometimes hard to bridge the gap of years. We read their letters, we look at their faded, sepia photographs, and we reach out to touch a history that feels both distant and profoundly close. Sometimes, being able to hold a physical piece of that era, or seeing their stories brought to life on the screen, helps us truly understand the weight of what they carried. If you find yourself wanting to connect more deeply with this period, to hold a piece of history in your own hands, I highly recommend exploring the collection of World War II memorabilia available on Amazon, or watching beautifully crafted films like Midway, which capture the vast, sprawling emotion of this global struggle. It is a wonderful way to honor their memory and keep their stories alive in your own home. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. On those quiet airfields, beneath the grand sweep of history, everyday heroism was already taking root. It wasn't found in loud declarations or grand gestures. It was found in the quiet, steady hands of the ground crews. In the cool, cavernous shade of the hangars, older men and very young lads moved like ghosts around the machines. They didn't fly, but their hearts were tethered to the canvas and metal just the same. They worked with quiet devotion. They ran oily rags over the smooth cowlings, checking and rechecking bolts, tightening wires, filling tanks with a slow, deliberate care. For them, these machines were not just weapons, they were vessels. They knew that a loose screw or a missed drop of oil could mean the difference between a boy coming back for dinner or a heavy, unbearable silence at an empty chair. Sometimes, late at night, when the rest of the base was asleep, you might see a mechanic standing alone in the hangar, resting a rough, grease-stained hand gently against the side of a fuselage. It was a gesture of profound tenderness. A silent communion. A whispered plea to the metal and the wood to hold together, to fly true, to bring the boy home. And beyond the airfields, the island itself seemed to be holding its breath. In gardens across the southern counties, women hung their laundry on the line, the white cotton snapping gently in the breeze. They would pause, clothespin in hand, and look up at the immense, cloudless sky. To a pilot, that clear blue expanse was a beautiful canvas. To a mother, to a wife, it was a terrifying emptiness. They found themselves doing strange things. They found themselves praying for gray skies. They prayed for thick, heavy fog to roll in off the sea. They prayed for rain to turn the airfields to mud. Because bad weather meant the plane stayed on the ground. Bad weather meant safety. Bad weather meant another day, another night, where the world remained unbroken. The sun begins to dip lower in the sky now. The golden hour arrives, casting long, soft shadows across the manicured grass of the aerodromes. The bright green fades into a deep, rich emerald. The air cools, carrying the scent of dew and damp earth. The boy with the pen finishes his letter. He puts the cap back on, the small click sounding loud in the quiet air. The friend who was sleeping stirs, pushing his cap back, blinking against the fading light. The cricket ball stops its rhythmic thudding. They stand up, stretching their legs, their leather boots crunching softly on the dry grass. They walk toward the mess hall, their shoulders brushing. They don't talk about tomorrow. They talk about a girl they met at a dance last week. They talk about a funny thing the flight commander said. They talk about anything and everything except the shadow that is creeping across the channel. As night finally falls, the world shrinks. It becomes just the size of the barracks. The narrow beds, the thin blankets, the sound of a dozen other young men breathing in the dark. Outside, the stars come out, brilliant and cold. They are the same stars shining down on the dark, silent coast of France. Some of the boys sleep easily, the deep, dreamless sleep of youth. Others lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. They feel the strange, solitary ache of being surrounded by friends but entirely alone with their own thoughts. They wonder if they are brave enough. They wonder what it will feel like when the waiting finally ends. They close their eyes. They pull the rough blankets up to their chins. They breathe in the scent of the wool, letting the quiet of the night wash over them. The channel remains out there in the dark, a silent barrier, a stretch of black water hiding the storm. But for now, in this small sliver of time, there is only the gentle rhythm of breathing. There is only rest. There is only the quiet grace of the night, holding them safe, just for a little while longer. The heaviest things we carry are often made of nothing but thin paper and blue ink. In the quiet, sun-warmed bedrooms of 1,000 homes across the country, a familiar, heartbreaking ritual was unfolding. If you were to walk down a leafy, suburban street in the late summer of that year, you would hear the gentle hum of ordinary life. The rhythmic clatter of a milk cart making its morning rounds. The soft, rhythmic sweep of a broom across a front step. The distant, joyful shout of children playing in the park. But inside the houses, behind the neat curtains and the freshly painted doors, time was slowing down. In one such room, the morning light filters through a lace curtain, casting intricate, shifting patterns of shadow and gold onto the wooden floorboards. The air smells faintly of lavender and beeswax, the comforting sense of a childhood home. A mother stands beside a narrow bed. On the mattress lies a small, brown leather suitcase, its brass latches gleaming in the soft light. She moves with deliberate slowness. Her hands, worn by years of washing and tending to a family, gently fold a thick, woolen sweater. She smooths out the invisible wrinkles, her fingers lingering on the fabric just a moment longer than necessary. She packs a pair of hand-knitted socks, a fresh bar of soap wrapped in brown paper, and a small tin of shortbread biscuits. These are the simple, quiet offerings of a mother's love. She cannot pack armor. She cannot pack a shield. She can only pack warmth and sustenance and the silent hope that her boy will not be cold and will not be hungry. The boy, and he is still so very much a boy, stands in the doorway. He is wearing his new uniform. The blue wool is stiff, unfamiliar, and it smells faintly of mothballs and warehouse shelves. He shifts his weight from foot to foot, feeling suddenly like a stranger in the room where he has slept every night since he was a child. He looks at his mother's back, seeing the slight tremor in her shoulders, and he feels a sudden, profound ache in his chest. But because they are bound by the quiet stoicism of their time, neither of them speaks of the fear that hangs in the air like dust motes. Instead, they talk of ordinary things. She asks if he has remembered his toothbrush. He assures her that he has. He promises to write as soon as he arrives. She tells him to mind the damp and to make sure he eats his vegetables at the mess hall. These small, mundane sentences are fragile vessels carrying an ocean of unspoken love. When the time comes to leave, the farewell at the railway station is brief. The platform is crowded with hundreds of other young men in identical stiff uniforms, surrounded by families trying very hard to smile. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and steam, the hiss of the engine a constant, overwhelming backdrop. The father shakes the boy's hand, a firm, lingering grip. The mother adjusts his collar, a final, necessary touch. "Look after yourself, love," she whispers, her voice barely carrying over the noise of the train whistle. And then he is gone. The train pulls away, a long, dark ribbon winding into the green countryside, leaving the parents standing on the empty platform, the silence of the station suddenly deafening. When the mother returns home, the house feels impossibly large. She walks up the stairs, her hand resting lightly on the banister. She enters his room. It is exactly as he left it. The bed is made. His cricket bat leans in the corner. On the desk, a small model airplane catches the afternoon light. She walks over to the desk, her footsteps soft on the rug. She opens the top drawer. Inside, resting gently against a stack of old school books, is an envelope. It is sealed. On the front, written in a familiar, slightly messy scrawl, are the words, "To be opened in the event of my not returning." She does not touch it. She just stands there, looking down at the white paper. In that drawer lies the ultimate expression of quiet heroism. The boy had sat at this desk, perhaps late at night while the rest of the house was sleeping, and forced himself to imagine the unimaginable. He had taken a pen and tried to find the words to comfort the people he loved, from beyond the veil of a future he might not see. He had poured his gratitude, his apologies, and his endless affection into a few lines of blue ink. And then he had sealed it, placed it in the drawer, closed it, and gone down to breakfast the next morning with a smile on his face. The courage it takes to write such a letter, to fold it neatly, to leave it waiting in the dark wood of a desk drawer, is a profound, quiet kind of bravery. It is a bravery born not of anger or duty, but of pure, selfless devotion. These letters were written in 1,000 homes, tucked into drawers, hidden under mattresses, slipped between the pages of Bibles. There were the silent anchors tying the boys in the sky to the earth below. And it is in these raw, unfiltered expressions of love that we find the true heart of this history. We are so often shown the polished version of the past, the neat narratives and the triumphant photographs. But beneath that veneer lies a deeply human reality, a reality made of trembling hands, tear-stained paper, and profound, unguarded emotion. Connecting with that unfiltered reality can change the way we understand the sacrifices made during those days. To see the history beyond the carefully curated archives is to see the true humanity of those who lived it. If you find yourself wanting to look beyond the polished history books and connect with the raw, uncensored truth of the era, I have put together a collection of unseen media from the war, available on Gumroad. These are the rare, genuine images and private moments that are often too restricted or sensitive to show on regular platforms. They show the genuine exhaustion, the real faces, and the unvarnished truth of those days, capturing a reality that words alone can hardly describe. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. While the letters rested silently in the drawers at home, the women who remained behind entered a new kind of existence. It was a life defined by the quiet arithmetic of waiting. Imagine a young wife in a small, cozy flat in the city. The evening is drawing in, painting the sky outside her window in shades of deep violet and bruised orange. She has drawn the heavy blackout curtains, sealing herself inside a warm, softly lit cocoon. The fire pops and crackles in the hearth, casting a dancing, golden glow over the armchairs and the patterned rug. She is sitting by the wireless radio. The dial is glowing with a faint, amber light. She is knitting, the metal needles clicking rhythmically in her hands, a soft, hypnotic sound. But her mind is not on the wool. She is listening. She is listening to the cheerful voice of the broadcaster reading the evening news, but beneath that, she is listening to the silence of the room and the vast, unknown silence of the sky outside. Every time the phone rings in the hallway, her breath catches in her throat. Every time there is a knock at the door, a cold dread washes over her skin until she sees it is only the postman or a neighbor coming to borrow a cup of sugar. The waiting is a physical weight, a tension carried in the shoulders and the jaw. It is an exhaustion that sleep cannot cure. Yet, they carried on. They found comfort in routine. They boiled the kettle and made tea, the warm, fragrant steam rising from delicate china cups. They tended their small vegetable gardens, finding solace in the soil, in the quiet, undeniable promise of a seed pushing its way toward the sun. They gathered in kitchens and parlors, sharing meager rations and sharing the burden of their fears without ever having to speak them aloud. A knowing glance over a teacup, a gentle hand placed over another's, these were the lifelines that kept them afloat in a sea of uncertainty. And miles away, at the edges of the green airfields, the boys were writing back. In the dispersal huts, surrounded by the smell of damp canvas and high-octane fuel, they sat in sagging armchairs with writing pads balanced on their knees. Outside, the mechanics were warming up the engines, a low, vibrating hum that rattled the teacups on the wooden tables. The pilot bites the end of his pen, looking out the window at the sleek, deadly machines waiting on the grass. He turns back to his paper and begins to write. "My dearest," he writes. He tells her about a stray dog that has adopted the squadron, a scruffy terrier that sleeps under the commander's desk. He tells her about the terrible, burnt toast they had for breakfast. He describes the beautiful sunset he saw the evening before, painting the clouds in colors he wishes he could capture for her. He does not write about the cold, thin air at 20,000 feet. He does not write about the smell of cordite, or the blinding glare of the sun when the enemy drops from above. He doesn't tell her how his hands shook so badly after the morning patrol that he couldn't light his own cigarette. He filters the world for her. He takes the terror and the noise and the unimaginable stress, and he distills it into an anecdote about a scruffy dog and burnt toast. He sends her only the gentle things, wrapping his words in a protective embrace, trying to reach across the miles and shield her from the storm. When the letter arrives days later, falling softly onto the doormat with a quiet flutter, she will pick it up with trembling hands. She will recognize his handwriting, the familiar loops and curves of his name, and a wave of pure, overwhelming relief will wash through her. She will carry that letter in her pocket all day. She will touch the paper, knowing that his hands touched it, too. She will read the words about the dog and the toast over and over again, finding in those mundane details the most profound reassurance in the world. He is alive. He is still himself. He is thinking of home. These letters, these fragile paper boats sent across an ocean of uncertainty, are the true artifacts of survival. They are testaments to the quiet resilience of the human heart, to the desperate need we all have to reach out in the dark and find another hand holding on. As the night deepens over the island, the lights go out one by one. The mothers and wives fold away their knitting. They turn off the glowing dials of the radios. They climb the stairs to their empty bedrooms, pulling the heavy blankets up around them. In the quiet dark, they close their eyes. They think of the letters in the drawers, the letters in their pockets, the letters still traveling in mailbags across the sleeping country. They let the memory of the ink on the page soothe them. They let the quiet rhythm of the night wash away the exhaustion of waiting. They find a peaceful stillness, resting in the knowledge that love, bound in paper and words, is stronger than the shadows, and that somewhere, beneath the same blanket of stars, their boys are dreaming of home. There is a secret language spoken in the quiet hours of the night, whispered between tired hands and resting metal. Long after the sun has slipped beneath the horizon, and the heavy blanket of evening has settled over the English countryside, the aerodromes take on a different kind of life. In the barracks, the young men who fly the machines are finally asleep. Their breathing is soft and rhythmic, their dreams hopefully far away from the vast, empty expanses of the sky. But down on the grass, hidden within the cavernous shadows of the hangars and the canvas dispersal tents, the world is wide awake. If you were to walk across the damp, dew-soaked grass in the middle of the night, you would hear it. The gentle, metallic clink of a spanner against a bolt. The soft, rhythmic scrape of a wire brush. The low, muffled voices of men speaking in hushed tones, careful not to break the stillness of the dark. You would smell the heavy, rich scent of engine oil, the sharp tang of high-octane fuel, and the peculiar, sweet smell of the dope used to seal the fabric of the wings. Here, in the dim, amber glow of shaded work lamps, you find the ground crews. They are a mixture of ages. Some are boys even younger than the pilots, their faces smudged with grease, their coveralls hopelessly oversized. Others are older men, veterans of a previous, muddy war, their hands thick and calloused from decades of labor. Together, they move around the resting fighter planes with a quiet, reverent grace. When we think of these iconic machines, we picture them soaring majestically through the clouds, seemingly made of pure silver and untouchable power. But up close, in the intimate glow of a midnight lamp, you realize how incredibly fragile they truly are. They are not impenetrable fortresses. They are delicate constructions of thin aluminum, stretched canvas, and tightly woven wood. They are beautifully crafted, but they are vulnerable, and no one knows this better than the men who mend them. To watch a mechanic work on a plane in the dead of night is to watch an act of profound, unspoken love. Imagine a young rigger standing on a wooden crate to reach the leading edge of a wing. His fingers are numb from the midnight chill, his back aches from hours of standing, but his touch is as gentle as a surgeon's. Earlier that day, this very wing was torn by passing metal. Now, he carefully smooths a fresh patch of linen over the jagged wound. He paints the stiffening lacquer over the fabric, watching it pull tight, smoothing out every tiny wrinkle with the pad of his thumb. He traces the seams over and over, entirely lost in the rhythm of the work. He knows that tomorrow, the boy who sleeps in the barracks will climb into this seat and hurl himself back into the heavens. He knows that at 20,000 feet, where the air is thin and the cold is absolute, the integrity of this single patch of canvas might mean the difference between life and death. And so, he does not rush. He works with a meticulous, quiet devotion, pouring all his unspoken prayers for the pilot's safe return into the turning of every screw and the tightening of every wire. There is a deeply moving intimacy between the man who flies the machine and the man who tends to it. They rarely speak of it. Their worlds are entirely different. The pilot lives in a realm of adrenaline, sunlight, and dizzying heights. The mechanic lives in a world of shadows, grease, and the cold earth. Yet, they are bound together by an invisible thread of absolute trust. When a pilot climbs out of his cockpit at the end of a long, terrifying day, his legs are often weak, his hands trembling with exhaustion. He doesn't need to say a word to his ground crew. The chief mechanic simply steps forward, placing a steady, reassuring hand on the edge of the cockpit. They exchange a brief look, a silent acknowledgement that the machine held together, that the boy has come home. Sometimes, the pilot will leave a small token behind. A half-eaten packet of peppermint candies resting on the pilot's seat. A crumpled, unlit cigarette tucked behind a dial. It is a quiet offering, a simple thank you left for the hands that will soon arrive to scrub the oil from the windshield and rearm the guns. And in return, the mechanic will leave the cockpit spotless. He will wipe away the sweat and the dirt. He will polish the glass until it shines like a mirror, ensuring that when the pilot returns at dawn, he steps into a space that feels cared for, a space that feels safe. This is the everyday heroism that rarely makes it into the grand historical records. It is not found in glorious victories or dramatic moments of combat. It is found at 3 a.m, when an exhausted fitter realizes he has dropped a tiny washer into the depths of the engine bay. No one would ever know. The plane would likely fly perfectly well without it. But he doesn't ignore it. He spends another hour in the freezing dark, dismantling the housing, his fingers raw and bleeding, until he finds that single piece of metal and replaces it properly. He does it because he cares. He does it because the boy who will fly this plane is his responsibility, and he will not let him down. There is a deep, quiet power in this unseen work. The careful, solitary effort that goes into preserving something beautiful, ensuring that a vital story continues to fly. In many ways, gathering these scattered fragments of the past and weaving them into the stories we share tonight feels very much like that quiet, midnight labor. It takes a tremendous amount of time, solitary research, and a deep, enduring love for preserving these echoes of history so they are not forgotten. If you find peace and value in these gentle journeys to the past, and if you would like to help support the countless hours it takes to craft them, I have a small tip jar over on Ko-Fi. Even a gesture as small as a single dollar goes so far in supporting this channel and keeping these stories alive for us all to share. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the deepest, darkest part of the night begins to wane, a subtle shift occurs on the aerodrome. The air grows even colder, the sharp, biting chill that always precedes the dawn. The heavy blackness of the sky begins to soften, turning a bruised, watery gray at the very edge of the eastern horizon. The mechanics are reaching the end of their marathon. Their faces are pale with fatigue, their eyes heavy, but there is a quiet satisfaction in the hangars. The engines have been tested, purring with a smooth, powerful rhythm that speaks of perfect calibration. The canvas has been patched, the wood has been polished, the belts of ammunition have been meticulously folded into their bays, completely free of dust or grit. A tea trolley makes its final rounds over the uneven grass, the wheels squeaking softly. A young lad pours steaming, sugary tea into chipped enamel mugs, handing them out to the men. They stand together in small groups, their hands wrapped tightly around the warm mugs, letting the steam rise against their chilled faces. They look out over the field, where the fruits of their night's labor are lined up in perfect, silent rows. The plains look magnificent in the gathering dawn. Covered in a fine layer of morning dew, they glisten like silver phantoms against the pale grass. They no longer look fragile. Under the care of the ground crews, they have been restored. They look strong. They look ready. Soon, the door to the barracks will open. The pilots will emerge, blinking in the early light, pulling their thick leather jackets tightly around their shoulders against the morning chill. They will walk across the grass, their boots leaving dark trails in the heavy dew. They will look tired, carrying the weight of the day that is about to begin. But as they approach their machines, their steps will become a little lighter. They will see the freshly painted canvas, the perfectly clear glass, the neat, orderly cockpits waiting for them. They will feel the profound comfort of knowing that while they slept, someone was awake in the dark, watching over them, preparing the way. The mechanics step back, retreating slightly into the shadows of the morning. They watch as the pilots climb onto the wings and slide into their seats. There is a moment of profound quiet across the entire airfield, a collective holding of breath as the starters are engaged. And then, one by one, the engines cough, sputter, and catch. The sound is not violent, it is a deep, resonating heartbeat that shakes the ground and vibrates in the chest. The propellers become blurring discs of light, blowing away the morning mist, bending the tall grass flat against the earth. The mechanics stand near the edge of the runway, the wind from the slipstream pulling at their clothes. They watch as the planes taxi forward, picking up speed, lighter than air, until the wheels finally leave the ground and they pull gracefully up into the pale morning sky. The men on the ground do not cheer. They simply watch. They stand with their hands in their pockets, their eyes following the rising silhouettes until they are nothing but tiny, vanishing specks against the clouds. Then, slowly, quietly, they turn back toward the empty hangars. They will sleep now, for a few short hours, before the planes return and the delicate, loving work begins all over again. They find peace in the rhythm, in the wood and the canvas, and in the quiet, enduring grace of keeping the sky aloft. There is a sound that, once heard, forever changes the way you look at the evening sky. It begins on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The kind of late summer evening where the heat of the day finally yields to a soft, forgiving breeze. In a small village nestled among the rolling hills of Kent, the rhythm of life is slowing down. The baker is sweeping the flour from his front step, the bristles of his broom making a gentle, rhythmic shushing sound against the cobblestones. In a garden just down the lane, a young woman is taking the laundry off the line, the white cotton sheets smelling of sunshine and fresh grass. She pauses, looking westward, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in bruised shades of violet and pale, dusty rose. Inside the houses, the evening rituals begin. It is a time of quiet comfort. A grandfather winds the clock on the mantelpiece. A mother carefully pins up the heavy, dark fabric of the blackout curtains, sealing the house away from the outside world. This act, too, has become a ritual. She smooths the edges, ensuring not a single sliver of light from the hearth can escape into the gathering dusk. The room is transformed into a warm, amber-lit sanctuary. The wireless radio hums softly in the corner, playing a slow, sweeping orchestral melody. A kettle begins to whistle on the stove, a sharp, familiar note of domestic peace. And then, beneath the melody of the radio, beneath the whistle of the kettle, a new sound begins. It starts low, a mechanical clearing of the throat somewhere far off in the distance. And then it rises. It sweeps upward in a slow, mournful wail, stretching across the valleys, curling over the thatched roofs, and slipping down the chimneys. It is the air raid siren. It is a sound designed to carry, designed to warn, but in these early days, it feels entirely surreal. It does not belong here, among the blooming rose bushes and the sleeping dogs. It feels like a ghost story whispered in the middle of a bustling market. The rise and fall of the note is hypnotic. It is not met with screaming. It is not met with panic. That is the strange, quiet truth of history that often goes unspoken. Instead, there is a collective, heavy sigh. In the amber glow of the sitting room, the mother simply turns off the stove. The grandfather sets down his newspaper, carefully folding it along the crease. The young woman from the garden walks through the back door, her arms full of the fresh laundry, her face completely calm, though her heart beats a slightly faster rhythm against her ribs. They have practiced this. They know the steps to this strange, somber dance. They gather the things that matter. It is a revealing moment, what a person chooses to carry into the dark. A father slips a worn, leather-bound Bible into his coat pocket. A small boy, eyes wide but silent, clutches a one-eared stuffed bear tightly against his chest. The mother pours the freshly boiled water into a flask, adding a pinch of tea leaves, twisting the cork tight. She grabs a heavy woolen blanket from the back of the sofa. They move with a quiet, deliberate grace. There is an unspoken agreement among them all: we will not let the fear take root. We will hold our heads high, and we will simply endure. They step out of the back door and into the cool night air. The garden, which was so friendly in the sunlight, now feels vast and mysterious. The beam of a small, hooded flashlight guides their feet along the damp path. They pass the tomato vines, the scent of the leaves sharp and green in the night air. They reach the mound of earth at the back of the garden. This is the Anderson shelter. Half buried in the soil, covered with a thick layer of turf, it is a tiny, corrugated iron womb. The father goes first, pushing aside the heavy canvas flap that serves as a door. The air inside is completely different. It is perfectly still, and it smells of cold, damp earth and old metal. It is the smell of a root cellar, earthy and raw. The family files in, taking their seats on the narrow wooden benches that line the curved walls. The father strikes a match. The sudden hiss is loud in the small space. He touches the flame to the wick of a single candle resting on a tin plate. The golden light flares, casting long, dancing shadows across the ribbed ceiling. The light catches the dust motes hanging in the air, turning them into tiny, floating stars. It illuminates the faces of the family. They look tired, but they are together. Outside, the wail of the siren finally winds down, leaving behind a silence that is heavier than before. They sit in the quiet. They listen. They wrap the rough wool of the blanket around the boy's shoulders. The mother unscrews the top of the flask, and the sweet, comforting smell of warm tea fills the small, damp space. She hands a steaming cup to her husband. Their fingers brush in the dark. It is a small moment, a fleeting touch, but it carries the weight of a profound promise. I am here. We are together. The world above may be fracturing, but down here, in the earth, we are whole. These are the moments where true history lives. Not in the grand speeches broadcast over the wireless, and not in the bold headlines of the morning papers. The real story of this time is found in the hushed, uncensored conversations whispered in the glow of a single candle. It is found in the private fears that were never written down, the raw, unfiltered humanity of people simply trying to survive the night. When we look back at this era, it is so important to see past the polished propaganda and the stiff upper lip, and to gently uncover the vulnerable, unvarnished truth of those who lived it. If you find yourself wanting to sit a little longer with these deeper, untold stories, I warmly invite you to join our community on Patreon. There, I share the raw, uncensored narratives, deep dive podcasts, and the deeply human histories that we simply cannot explore on this platform. It is a quiet corner for history lovers to gather and support the immense research that goes into these documentaries. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the night stretches on, the shelter becomes a world unto itself. The candle burns lower, a steady pool of melted wax gathering on the tin plate. The mother opens a paperback book. The pages are soft from use. She begins to read aloud, her voice a soft, murmuring river in the dark. She reads a story of green fields, of summer days, of things entirely removed from the reality of the corrugated walls. She reads to mask the sounds from above. Because eventually, the silence is broken. It is a deep, pulsating thrum. It vibrates in the floorboards. It rattles the teacups. It is the sound of heavy engines, dozens of them, passing high overhead, unseen in the sea of stars. And occasionally, much higher up, there is the finer, sharper sound of the Spitfires and Hurricanes, weaving their delicate, deadly dances in the dark. The people in the earth do not look up. They look at each other. They listen to the mother's voice. The little boy's eyelids grow heavy. He leans his head against his mother's knee, the one-eared bear tucked under his chin, and he slips into the pure, innocent sleep of childhood. This is the quiet resilience of the everyday. To sit in the damp earth, while the sky hums with danger, and to calmly read a bedtime story. To sip lukewarm tea. To patiently wait for the dawn. It is an extraordinary endurance masked as ordinary patience. The grandfather closes his eyes, his breathing falling into a slow, measured rhythm. The father watches the flame of the candle flutter, guarding it from the draft with his cupped hand. Hours pass like water moving over smooth stones. Slowly. Steadily. Until, finally, the atmosphere changes. The heavy drone of the engines fades, swallowed by the vast distance of the sky. The earth stops its gentle trembling. And then, from across the valley, a new sound begins. It is the siren again, but this time, it is different. It does not rise and fall. It holds a single, continuous, steady note. The all clear. It is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of a promise kept. The sun will rise again. The father blows out the candle. He pushes the heavy canvas flap aside. The pale, milky light of early dawn spills into the shelter. They step out into the garden. The air is impossibly fresh, sweet with the scent of wet grass and morning dew. The birds are just beginning to sing, a tentative, trilling chorus greeting the new day. They walk back up the path. They are stiff, they are tired, and they are cold. But as they open the back door of their home, and step back into the familiar warmth of the kitchen, there is a profound, quiet victory in the air. The mother walks over to the stove. She strikes a match. She places the kettle over the blue flame. The water will boil. The tea will be made. The sweeping of the steps will begin again. The sky may hold its echoes, and the night may bring its shadows, but here, on the ground, the quiet, enduring heartbeat of life simply carries on. There is a place high above the earth where the air grows so thin and cold that breathing feels like swallowing winter itself. When we think of the sky, we often think of it from the ground looking up. We see a vast, unbroken canopy of blue, perhaps dotted with lazy, drifting clouds that look like spun sugar. It seems peaceful. It seems entirely empty. But for the young men who climbed into the narrow, metallic confines of their cockpits during that long summer, the sky was not empty. It was an ocean, vast and deep, with its own currents, its own valleys, and its own deep, profound silences. Imagine the feeling of leaving the earth behind. The grass of the airfield falls away beneath the wheels, turning from individual blades into a smooth, green carpet and then into a patchwork quilt of farms and fields. The roads become tiny gray ribbons. The houses shrink down to the size of pebbles. All the familiar, comforting things of the world are reduced to miniatures, and then they are swallowed entirely by a layer of mist. As the machine climbs higher, the temperature drops rapidly. Inside the cockpit, the boy, for he is still just a boy, barely 20 years old, pulls his thick leather collar up around his neck. The heater barely pushes back the creeping frost that begins to gather in the corners of his glass canopy. He wears heavy gloves, fleece-lined boots, and a rubber oxygen mask that smells faintly of talcum powder and his own nervous breath. He is entirely alone. Down on the ground, he was surrounded by voices. The joking of his friends in the mess hall, the stern instructions of his commanding officer, the reassuring pat on the shoulder from his mechanic. But up here, at 15,000 feet, there is only the deafening, continuous roar of the great engine directly in front of him. It is a noise so loud and so constant that it eventually becomes a kind of silence all its own. It vibrates through the soles of his boots, up through his legs, and settles deep in his chest. It becomes the new heartbeat of his world. He looks out through the scratched perspex glass. The clouds here are not small or fluffy. They are towering mountains of white and gray vapor, magnificent and indifferent. He weaves his machine through valleys made of pure mist, passing cliffs of cloud that look solid enough to touch. The sunlight filters through them in strange, ethereal beams of gold and pale yellow. It is beautiful. It is breathtakingly, overwhelmingly beautiful. And then, the tremor begins. It is not a tremor in the machine. The engine is singing its steady, powerful note. The wings are cutting smoothly through the thin air. The tremor is inside him. It starts as a flutter in the stomach, a sudden, cold tightening of the muscles in the throat. He is flying over the channel now. The water below looks like a sheet of wrinkled, gray silk. And somewhere out there, hidden in the glare of the sun or lurking behind a tower of white cloud, is the unknown. For weeks, they have trained. They have shot at fabric targets towed behind friendly planes. They have memorized manuals and listened to lectures in stuffy rooms. But nothing can prepare a human heart for the reality of another soul, rising from the earth to meet them in the endless sky. He checks his instruments, a familiar, comforting routine. He taps the glass of the altimeter. He looks at a small, faded photograph tucked carefully into the edge of the instrument panel. It is a picture of his family, standing in a sunny garden, squinting against the light. Their smiles are frozen in time, anchoring him to the world of grass and earth. He touches the edge of the paper with his thick leather glove. Suddenly, the static in his earphones hisses. A calm, distorted voice breaks through the white noise, offering a few brief, coded words. He looks up. He squints against the blinding azure light. At first, he sees nothing but the vast emptiness. And then, far away, higher up and moving with a slow, deliberate grace, he sees them. They look like tiny, dark seeds scattered across the blue canvas. Just small specks. The shock of it is profound, not because it is loud or explosive, but because it is so incredibly quiet. The distance makes everything look like a slow-motion dance. His heart pounds against his ribs, a frantic rhythm completely at odds with the majestic slowness of the scene unfolding miles away. He realizes, with a sudden, crystal clarity, that this is no longer a practice run over the gentle hills of home. The abstract idea of the conflict has suddenly materialized into dark specks of metal, moving purposefully through the clouds. He grips the spade-shaped handle of the control column. His knuckles turn white beneath the leather. He can feel the cold sweat gathering at the nape of his neck, prickling his skin. This is the moment where youth evaporates. It vanishes into the freezing air, replaced by a deep, ancient instinct to survive. He turns his machine, feeling the heavy, immense pressure of the turn pushing him down into his seat. The horizon tilts wildly. The blue sky and the white clouds blur together in a dizzying wash of color. As the distance closes, the surreal silence persists. The roar of his own engine drowns out the sound of the approaching machines. He cannot hear them. He can only see the sudden, bright flashes of light winking along their wings. It looks like the harmless fluttering of fireflies in a summer garden. It takes his mind a fraction of a second to understand that those beautiful, winking lights are traces of fire reaching out across the void. It is a deeply strange experience to fight a battle where you cannot hear your opponent, where you cannot look them in the eye. It is an abstract, mechanical ballet, driven by immense forces and profound human fear. He maneuvers his plane entirely on instinct, slipping through the air, reacting to the shadows and the light. He is breathing rapidly, the rubber mask pulling tight against his face with every inhalation. In this vast, three-dimensional ocean, so much happens out of sight. The movements, the tactics, the quiet desperation, they are all hidden behind the blinding sun or buried deep within the towering clouds. It is a war of shadows and secrets, fought by young men who are, in that moment, invisible to the world below. The things that happen in the clouds, the quiet maneuvers and unseen struggles, remind us of how much of history occurs completely out of view. Beyond the skies, there was an entire world of invisible heroism and quiet sacrifice shaping the outcome of those days, stories of espionage, secret codes, and hidden figures that never made the headlines. Understanding these unseen layers brings a completely new depth to how we view the courage of the time. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden corners of history, I would love to share something special with you. I offer a free weekly email newsletter where we explore these forgotten facts and hidden heroes, and when you join, I will send you a free ebook titled The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It is a gentle deep dive into the unseen operations that changed the course of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As quickly as the encounter began, the sky empties. The dark specks vanish into the mist, slipping away over the gray water of the channel. The winking lights cease. The sky returns to its vast, unbroken blue. The boy in the cockpit eases back on the throttle. The sudden deceleration pushes him gently forward against his straps. He lets out a breath he feels he has been holding for an eternity. His shoulders, previously bunched tight with tension, drop heavily. He is shaking. His hands tremble so violently against the controls that he has to take them off the grip for a moment, pressing them flat against his thighs to steady them. He is alive. The realization washes over him slowly, like warm water. He looks out at the wings of his machine. They are whole. The engine continues its steady, faithful lullaby. The sky around him is no longer a theater of abstract terror, it is once again just a beautiful, empty space. He turns the nose of his plane toward home. The descent is a quiet journey of return. He glides down from the freezing altitudes, leaving the towering cathedrals of cloud behind. As he drops lower, the air begins to warm. He can smell the damp earth again. He can see the patchwork of the fields, the dark ribbons of the roads, and the tiny clusters of houses sitting peacefully in the late afternoon sun. He sees the airfield, a welcoming stretch of green waiting for him. When the wheels finally touch the grass, there is a gentle bump, a familiar squeak of rubber, and then the comforting, uneven rumble of rolling over solid ground. He taxis the plane to the dispersal area and cuts the engine. The silence that rushes into the cockpit is absolute and heavy. It rings in his ears. He slides the canopy back, and the warm, sweet smell of summer grass and warm oil fills his senses. He pulls off his leather helmet and the rubber mask, feeling the cool evening breeze against his damp hair. He does not climb out immediately. He sits there in the quiet machine, his hands resting lightly on his lap. He looks at the photograph of his family on the dashboard. He reaches out and gently traces the edge of it with a bare, trembling finger. The ground crew arrives, their faces etched with quiet relief. They help him down from the wing. His legs feel heavy, like they are made of lead. He walks across the grass toward the mess hall, his boots brushing through the dew. He does not speak of the tremor in his chest. He does not speak of the winking lights or the dizzying cold. He accepts a mug of steaming, sugary tea from a friend, the porcelain warm and comforting against his palms. He stands outside the hut, holding his tea, and looks up at the sky. The sun is setting, painting the high clouds in soft shades of peach and lavender. It looks so peaceful. It looks like a painting. But he knows now what lives in the high, cold air. He has felt the tremor, and he has returned. He takes a slow sip of his tea, feeling the warmth spread through his body, anchoring him deeply, wonderfully, to the earth. There is an exhaustion born not from movement, but from the unbearable weight of waiting. If you were to step out of the bright, blinding summer sunshine and into the wooden dispersal hut at the edge of the airfield, it would take your eyes a moment to adjust to the shadows. It is a room built for a purpose, yet filled entirely with the feeling of purposelessness. The air inside is thick. It smells of damp wool, stale tobacco smoke, leather polish, and the sweet, milky scent of tea that has been left sitting just a little too long. Dust motes dance lazily in the shafts of sunlight that cut through the small, smudged windows. The floorboards are scuffed by heavy boots, bearing the marks of 100 pacing footsteps. In the corner, a small cast-iron stove sits cold, a sleeping terrier curled tightly against its base, breathing in a soft, slow rhythm. And then, there are the boys. They are draped across sagging, mismatched armchairs donated from local parlors, their long legs stretched out in front of them. To look at them in this quiet hour is to see a portrait of absolute, bone-deep weariness. It is not the weariness of a hard day's labor. It is the deep, psychological fatigue of holding one's breath for hours on end. Time moves differently in the dispersal hut. It does not flow, it drips. It pools in the corners of the room. A clock on the wall ticks with a slow, heavy metronome beat, each click sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet space. In one chair, a young pilot is trying to read a paperback novel. The cover is creased, the pages soft and dog-eared. But if you watch his eyes, you will see that they are not moving down the page. He has been staring at the same paragraph for 20 minutes. His mind cannot hold onto the story of fictional people in fictional towns. His mind is tethered to the black telephone sitting on the wooden desk at the front of the room. At a small table nearby, two others are playing a game of chess. But it is a silent, almost motionless game. A hand reaches out, hovers over a wooden knight, hesitates, and then pulls back. They are not really thinking about strategy. The wooden board, the carved pieces, the gentle slide of the base against the table, it is just something to do with their hands. It is a way to anchor themselves to the solid earth when everything inside them is bracing for the sky. And always, there is the tea. The tea trolley is the quiet heartbeat of the waiting hours. A young lad, barely old enough to shave, pushes it through the door, the wheels squeaking softly. The tea is poured from a large, dented metal urn into thick porcelain mugs. It is strong, intensely sweet, and piping hot. The boys cradle the warm mugs in their hands, drawing comfort from the heat. They set them down on the wooden tables, leaving overlapping rings of brown stains on the varnish. Those tea stains are a map of their waiting. One ring for the morning patrol that never came. Another ring for the afternoon watch, when the clouds gathered thick and heavy over the channel. They are the marks of time spent doing nothing but existing in the space between safety and danger. It is a deeply strange existence. They are asked to transition from a state of absolute, mind-numbing boredom to a state of absolute, life-or-death terror in a matter of seconds. The human heart is not designed for such whiplash. It takes a toll. You can see it in the slight tremor of a hand as it strikes a match. You can see it in the dark, bruised shadows beneath their eyes. You can hear it in the way a conversation will suddenly trail off into silence, leaving a sentence hanging unfinished in the air. Yet, they do not complain. They share a quiet, unspoken brotherhood bound by this shared endurance. If a boy falls asleep in his chair, his head lolling to the side, his friends will lower their voices to a whisper, granting him a few precious moments of escape. They will drape a tunic over his shoulders if the room grows drafty. These are small, almost invisible gestures of profound kindness. It is these tangible things, the worn leather of their jackets, the dog-eared pages of a discarded book, the faded ink of a letter left half-written on a desk, that bridge the gap between their time and ours. They remind us that these were real people, surrounded by ordinary objects. Sometimes, being able to hold a piece of the past, or to immerse yourself in the visual history of those days, helps anchor these floating stories into reality. If you find yourself wanting to connect more deeply with the physical memory of this era, to hold a piece of history or see it brought to life, I highly recommend exploring the collection of World War II memorabilia available on Amazon or watching beautifully crafted, sweeping films like Midway that capture the vast human emotion of these global struggles. It is a wonderful way to honor their memory in your own space. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The afternoon sun shifts, moving the rectangles of light across the wooden floor. The sleeping dog twitches in a dream, letting out a soft, muffled bark. A boy folds a piece of paper into a tiny airplane, turning it slowly between his fingers, lost in thought. The ticking clock seems to grow louder, filling the spaces between their heartbeats. And then, the telephone rings. It is a sharp, shrill sound. It cuts through the thick air like a blade. The boy with the book drops it on his lap. The chess players freeze. The room holds its breath. An officer picks up the heavy black receiver. He listens for only a second. He murmurs a single word of confirmation, gently sets the receiver back in its cradle, and reaches for the wall. He presses the button for the scramble bell. The sound that follows is not a gentle chime. It is a harsh, vibrating, electrical alarm that shatters the sleepy calm of the dispersal hut into a million pieces. To witness a scramble is to witness time collapsing in on itself. The transition is instantaneous and surreal. There is no panic, but there is an explosion of focused, desperate kinetic energy. Chairs scrape violently against the floorboards. The paperback book falls to the ground, its pages splayed open against the dust. A heavy porcelain mug is knocked sideways, sending a river of hot, sweet tea spilling across the chessboard, washing over the wooden knights and pawns, dripping steadily onto the floor. The boys do not look at each other. They do not speak. The quiet, exhausted youths of a second ago are gone, entirely consumed by the urgent, mechanical process of becoming pilots. They grab their yellow life preservers, pulling them over their heads as they run. They burst through the doors of the hut, squinting against the sudden, blinding brilliance of the summer sun. Outside, the serene green field has transformed into a theater of deafening noise. The ground crews have already sprung into action. Engines that were cold and silent moments before are now coughing, sputtering, and roaring to life, spitting blue smoke into the clear air. The propellers become dangerous, blurring arcs of light. The boys run across the uneven grass. Their heavy flying boots pound against the earth. Their chests heave, pulling in the scent of exhaust fumes and cut grass. It is a desperate, lung-burning sprint. Every second that ticks by is a foot of altitude they will not have when they meet the shadows in the sky. A mechanic stands by the wing of a fighter, his hands holding the straps of the pilot's parachute. He does not shout over the roar of the engine. He just waits, his face a mask of intense concentration. The pilot scrambles up onto the wing, a blur of motion, swinging his legs over the edge and dropping into the narrow, metal confines of the cockpit. The mechanic leans in. His rough, oil-stained hands move with practiced speed, pulling the harness straps tight over the boy's shoulders, locking the heavy metal pin into place across his chest. For one brief, fleeting second, their eyes meet. The mechanic gives the leather shoulder pad a firm, reassuring pat. It is a silent blessing. It is the last human touch the boy will feel before he leaves the earth. The canopy slides shut, sealing the boy inside his glass and metal world. He pushes the throttle forward. The machine shudders, straining against its brakes, the roar of the engine vibrating deep in his bones. The noise is absolute, a physical force that presses against the skull. The plane lurches forward, rolling heavily over the turf, gaining speed. One by one, they lift off. The heavy, lumbering machines suddenly become weightless and graceful the moment the wheels leave the grass. They pull up into the vast, blue canvas of the sky, tucking their wheels away, banking sharply as they form into a line. They become smaller and smaller, turning into silver darts, and then into tiny specks, until they vanish entirely into the glare of the sun. Down below, the roar of the engine slowly fades, replaced by the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. The dust settles back onto the grass. The ground crews stand watching the empty sky for a long moment, their hands tucked into their overall pockets, before slowly turning back toward the hangars. And inside the dispersal hut, the profound, heavy quiet returns. But it is a different kind of quiet now. It is the quiet of absence. The room is completely still. The spilled tea drips softly from the edge of the table, landing in a small, brown puddle on the scuffed floorboards. The paperback book lies open, its spine cracked. The wooden chess pieces sit in the sticky liquid, their battle forever unresolved. The dog walks over to the empty armchair, sniffs the worn cushion where a boy was sleeping just moments ago, and curls up in the lingering warmth. The clock on the wall continues to tick, slow and steady. The waiting has begun again. But this time, it is not the boys who are waiting. It is the empty chairs. It is the half-written letters. It is the tea stains on the table. They are waiting in the quiet dust and the slanting sunbeams, holding the space, silently praying for the hands that left them behind to come back and finish the game. There is a profound, echoing silence that exists only above the clouds, a place where the earth below becomes nothing more than a painted memory. When we stand on the solid ground and look up at the vast expanse of the sky, it is impossible to truly comprehend the sheer, staggering loneliness of the high altitudes. Down here, we are wrapped in the comforting noise of life. The wind rustling through the broad leaves of an oak tree, the distant rattle of a passing train, the soft murmur of voices drifting from an open window. But for the young men climbing into the heavens, day after exhausted day, those familiar sounds faded away, replaced by a strange, overwhelming isolation. Imagine slipping into a space so small that your shoulders brush the cold metal walls on either side. The cockpit of a fighter plane was not built for comfort. It was built for purpose. It was a metal shell, barely larger than a coffin, wrapped around a terrifyingly powerful engine. When the canopy slid shut and locked into place, sealing the pilot inside, it severed his physical connection to the world. As the plane rises, leaving the green patchwork of the English countryside behind, the air outside begins to thin. It grows bitterly, unimaginably cold. Frost begins to creep across the edges of the perspex glass, forming delicate, crystalline ferns that catch the blinding, high-altitude sunlight. Inside his heavy sheepskin jacket and thick leather gloves, the boy shivers. But the most striking change is the sound. The roaring engine at the front of the plane is incredibly loud, a continuous, deafening vibration that rattles the teeth and shakes the bones. Yet, because it is so constant, the human brain slowly begins to push it into the background. It becomes a drone. A hum. And in the space left behind by that pushed-away noise, the pilot is left with only one sound to keep him company. The sound of his own breathing. Over his nose and mouth, he wears a heavy rubber mask. It smells of vulcanized rubber, stale sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of pure oxygen. With every breath he takes, the mask hisses. Inhale. A harsh, mechanical draw of air. Exhale. A flutter of the valve. In the vast, empty blue canvas of the upper atmosphere, miles above the homes and the loved ones they are trying to protect, this rhythm becomes a pilot's entire universe. Inhale. Exhale. It is a constant, terrifying reminder of his own fragile mortality. In the long stretches of patrol, when the sky is empty and there are no dark specks on the horizon, the mind begins to wander in the space between those breaths. What does a 20-year-old boy think about when he is suspended in the freezing void, waiting for a danger he cannot see? He does not think of grand strategies or the turning tides of history. He thinks of a girl with a ribbon in her hair, standing on a train platform. He thinks of the way the morning light catches the dust motes in his father's woodshop, the comforting scent of pine sawdust and linseed oil. He remembers the feeling of his mother's hand resting gently on the back of his neck when he was a child nursing a fever. He clings to these small, perfectly ordinary memories. They are his anchors. They are the invisible tethers keeping his soul tied to the earth while his body floats in the freezing ether. Sometimes, he reaches out with a thick, clumsy glove to touch a small talisman taped to the dashboard above the glowing, pale green dials. A lucky sixpence. A four-leaf clover pressed between two layers of sticky tape. A tiny, sepia photograph of a dog waiting patiently by a front gate. These tiny objects carry an immense, quiet power. They are concentrated fragments of love and hope, brought into a place where neither of those things naturally belong. We are so used to seeing the idealized images of this time. We see the pristine paintings, the neatly tailored uniforms, the brave, unwavering smiles plastered across recruitment posters and newsreels. We are given a polished, heroic narrative. But the truth, the deeply human reality, was far more raw. It was etched into the deep, bruised circles under the eyes of a boy who hasn't slept a full night in weeks. It was in the grease stains permanently worked into the creases of their hands, and the quiet, haunted stares they shared in the mess hall after a long patrol. To truly honor their memory, we must be willing to look past the polish and embrace the unvarnished reality of what they endured. Seeing the uncensored faces of the war, the moments of pure exhaustion and quiet, desperate camaraderie, changes the way we understand their sacrifice. If you find yourself wanting to connect with the genuine, unfiltered human experience of those days, I have compiled a deeply moving collection of unseen media and raw, unedited images on Gumroad. These are the private, unblurred pieces of history that show the true, harsh realities these brave souls faced, far from the polished propaganda. It is a profoundly moving journey into the real lives of the men and women who saved the sky. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the patrol stretches on, the isolation deepens. The boy in the cockpit looks out over the leading edge of his wing. The metal shines brilliantly against the deep, dark blue of the upper atmosphere. Below him, a thick layer of white clouds obscures the earth entirely. For all he knows, the world down there has ceased to exist. There is only this. The cold. The glass. The hiss of the oxygen. He feels a profound sense of smallness. He is just a speck of dust floating in an infinite ocean of air. If he were to vanish up here, would the sky even notice? The clouds would not part. The sun would not dim. The terrible, beautiful indifference of the sky is a heavy weight to bear. He checks his fuel gauge. The needle is slowly dipping, a quiet countdown ticking away his time in the heavens. A soft crackle of static breaks the silence in his earphones, followed by a calm, familiar voice from the ground controller. The voice is distorted, woven through with the white noise of distance, but it is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of home, calling him back. He pushes the stick forward. The nose of the plane dips, and the long descent begins. As he drops through the altitudes, the world slowly begins to rebuild itself. He plunges into the thick, white fog of the cloud layer, the brilliant sunlight vanishing instantly, replaced by a rushing, blinding gray mist. Moisture gathers on the canopy, the tiny ice crystals melting into fast-moving rivers of water that streak across the glass. And then, he breaks through the bottom of the clouds. There it is. The Earth. The beautiful, imperfect, messy Earth. The green of the fields is so vibrant it almost hurts his eyes. He can see the winding curves of a river reflecting the silver light, and the tiny, comforting shapes of rooftops clustered together. The air inside the cockpit begins to warm, the deep chill in his bones slowly starting to thaw. He peels the heavy rubber mask away from his face. He takes a breath of the lower air. It smells of damp soil, of blooming heather, of exhaust fumes and life. It is heavy, rich, and real. The airfield comes into view, a welcoming scar of brown and green on the landscape. He circles once, letting the speed bleed off, before dropping the landing gear. The heavy clunk of the wheels locking into place is a reassuring, solid sound. He glides down, the grass rushing up to meet him, until the wheels touch the earth with a gentle skip and a rumble. He rolls to a stop near the edge of the field. He cuts the engine. As the massive propeller winds down and finally ticks to a halt, the sudden silence is overwhelming. But it is not the lonely, echoing silence of the high altitudes. It is a warm, living quiet. He can hear the larks singing in the tall grass. He can hear the distant, cheerful shout of a mechanic running toward him. He rests his forehead against the cold edge of the instrument panel just for a moment. He closes his eyes. He listens to the steady, unassisted rhythm of his own heart. He breathes in. He breathes out. The space between his breaths is no longer filled with the terrifying vastness of the void. It is filled with the simple, miraculous grace of having survived to walk on the earth for one more day. The hardest part of the day was never the sky, it was the heavy, echoing quiet that followed the setting sun. As the late summer afternoon slowly bleeds into evening, the colors of the English countryside begin to change. The bright, vivid greens of the fields mellow into soft, shadowy olives. The sky, which just hours ago was a blinding, pale blue, softens into deep, bruised shades of violet, amber, and a dusty, melancholic rose. It is the golden hour. In any other time, it would be the hour for a slow walk down a country lane, or a quiet drink on a garden patio, watching the swallows dive for insects in the cooling air. But in this summer, the twilight brings a different kind of ritual. On the aerodromes, the ground crews stand near the edge of the grass. The long shadows of the hangars stretch out across the field, touching the edges of the runway. The men stand with their hands thrust deep into the pockets of their overalls. They are looking west, toward the setting sun, their eyes narrowed against the glare. They are listening. Eventually, the sound arrives. It is a low, uneven thrumming. The returning machines drop out of the painted sky, their silhouettes dark against the dying light. Down on the ground, a silent, anxious arithmetic begins. A mechanic tracks the planes with his eyes, his lips moving silently as he counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. He pauses, holding his breath, searching the empty spaces of the sky. He waits for the fifth. He waits for the familiar sputter of a specific engine, the unique shape of the patch he sewed onto a specific wing just the night before. The minutes stretch on. The sun sinks lower, pulling the light down with it. The horizon is empty. There is no dramatic wailing. There are no grand speeches. The mechanic simply lowers his head. He wipes a grease-stained hand across his tired eyes, turns, and walks back toward the hangar. The sky has claimed its toll for the day, and the grief that follows is an intensely private, incredibly quiet thing. When the surviving planes land, they do not look like triumphant chariots. They look exhausted. They roll to a stop on the grass, their engines ticking as the metal begins to cool. The boys climb out of the cockpits. They move slowly, their limbs heavy and stiff from the cold and the tension. Their faces are pale, smeared with oil and the dark marks left by their tight rubber oxygen masks. They walk across the field together, their leather boots brushing through the dampening grass. They walk shoulder to shoulder, but they do not speak. The silence between them is thick and heavy, woven from the things they have just seen, the things they cannot unsee, and the profound, echoing absence of the boy who did not fly back with them. In the distance, beyond the edges of the airfield, a thin column of gray smoke rises lazily into the twilight sky. It is a burning field. A piece of the battle that has fallen to the earth, setting the dry summer wheat alight. The smell of it drifts over the aerodrome, the scent of roasted grain, scorched earth, and hot metal. It is a campfire smell, strangely nostalgic, yet deeply heartbreaking. It is the scent of a world on fire, smoothed into a soft, atmospheric haze by the approaching night. The true weight of the day does not settle upon them until they reach the mess hall. Inside, the lights are kept low, casting a warm, amber glow over the wooden tables and the mismatched chairs. The air smells of roasted potatoes, thick gravy, and damp wool. A phonograph in the corner is playing a soft, scratchy dance tune, the upbeat melody feeling entirely detached from the reality of the room. The boys take their seats. The clatter of silverware against porcelain is muted. The conversations, when they happen, are spoken in hushed, gentle tones. And there, near the center of the room, is the empty chair. It is just a piece of wood. It has no voice, no expression, no life. Yet, it is the loudest thing in the room. It exerts a gravitational pull on every eye. A young pilot, carrying a plate of food, walks past the table. As he passes the empty chair, he reaches out, almost unconsciously, and rests his fingertips on the curved wooden back for just a fraction of a second. It is a fleeting, deeply intimate gesture. It is a goodbye that cannot be spoken aloud. How do you mourn a friend when you know you must fly back into the very same sky tomorrow morning? You cannot let the grief break you. You cannot afford the luxury of entirely falling apart. And so, these young men became masters of a quiet, internal containment. They swallowed their sorrow, burying it deep beneath a polite smile and a calm demeanor. They drank their tea. They forced themselves to eat. They asked about the weather for tomorrow. But later, in the quiet dimness of the barracks, the containment would crack, just a little. Imagine walking into the narrow, low-ceilinged bunk room. The rows of iron beds are neatly made, the rough gray blankets pulled tight. A boy sits on the edge of his mattress, his elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed. He is entirely alone in the room. Across from him is his friend's bed. The physical remnants of a life interrupted are the most difficult things to look at. On the small wooden nightstand, a wristwatch sits coiled, ticking away the seconds, faithfully keeping a time its own and no longer needs. A half-read paperback book lies face down on the pillow, holding a place in a story that will never be finished. Over the footboard hangs a hand-knitted sweater, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and peppermint. The boy stares at the sweater. He remembers the mother who knitted it, the stories his friend told in the dark about his childhood home, about the dog waiting by the gate, about the girl who promised to write. Slowly, the boy stands up. He walks over to the empty bed. With incredibly gentle, reverent hands, he begins to gather the belongings. He folds the sweater, smoothing out the wool. He closes the paperback book. He picks up the ticking watch. He places them all into a small canvas bag. He is doing this so his friend's family will have something to hold on to. He is doing this because leaving the bed exactly as it was is a cruelty he cannot bear. He moves with a quiet, deliberate grace. In this small, silent act of packing away a life, there is an ocean of unspoken love. It is the purest form of everyday heroism, the courage to face the profound pain of loss, to gently care for the memory of the fallen, and to somehow find the strength to close the canvas bag and face the dawn. Weaving these quiet threads of history together, finding the deeply human moments amidst the grand sweep of time, is a delicate and deeply emotional journey. It requires sifting through the noise to find the quiet heartbeats of those who lived this reality. Keeping these stories alive, preserving the memory of the empty chairs and the ticking watches, is a labor of pure love. If you find peace in these gentle journeys, and if you feel moved to support the countless hours of research and care it takes to craft these documentaries, I have set up a small tip jar on Ko-Fi. Even the smallest gesture helps to ensure these vital, emotional histories are never lost to time. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Outside the barracks, the twilight has finally surrendered to the night. The sky is a vast, unfathomable dome of black velvet, scattered with the brilliant, cold dust of a million stars. The smoke from the burning fields has dissipated, leaving only a faint, ashy memory in the cooling air. The aerodrome is completely silent now. The engines are asleep. The mechanics have retreated to their bunks. The world has wrapped itself in a heavy, protective blanket of darkness. Back in the mess hall, an older officer walks quietly through the empty room. He stops at the phonograph, lifting the heavy metal needle off the spinning record. The scratchy music ceases, leaving a profound stillness in its wake. He walks over to the table with the empty chair. He stands there for a long moment. He does not cry. His grief is an old, familiar companion, weathered and deep. He reaches down, picks up the empty teacup that still sits at that place setting, and carries it back to the kitchen. Then, he turns off the final amber lamp. The boys in the barracks pull their gray blankets up to their chins. They close their eyes. They must sleep. Sleep is the only sanctuary they have left, the only place where the sky is just a sky, and where the friends they have lost can still walk and talk and laugh in the vivid, golden light of memory. They breathe in the cool night air. They let the silence wash over their exhausted bodies. Tomorrow, the sun will rise. The sirens will likely sound again. The scramble bell will shatter the peace. But for now, in the gentle, forgiving dark of the English night, they are allowed to rest. They are allowed to be simply human, holding the fragile, beautiful memories of their fallen brothers close to their hearts, finding strength in the space between the stars, ready to face whatever the morning light may bring. To hold the fate of the sky in the palm of your hand, you do not always need to leave the earth. Far beneath the sunlit fields, hidden away from the gentle summer breezes and the blooming lavender, lay a world entirely devoid of natural light. Down steep flights of pale concrete stairs, past heavy steel doors that sealed with a dull, echoing thud, the air changed. It grew cool, carrying the scent of damp lime, warm electrical wires, and the faint, sweet perfume of face powder. This was the quiet, beating heart of the defense. If you were to step into one of these underground rooms, the first thing you would notice is not the tension, but the remarkable, deliberate hush. It was a cavernous space, lit by the amber glow of shaded lamps, casting long, soft shadows against the curved walls. And in the very center of the room, illuminated like a stage, was the map. It was a magnificent, sprawling wooden table, painted with the intricate, colorful geography of the island and the dark blue sweep of the channel. It looked like a giant, beautiful board game. But the women who stood around the edges of this table knew that this was no game. They were young. Many were barely out of school, their hair pinned up neatly beneath their caps, their uniforms pressed and spotless. They wore heavy, cumbersome headsets over their ears, the thick black cords trailing down their backs like tethers connecting them to the invisible world above. In their hands, they held long wooden rakes, remarkably similar to the ones croupiers used to push chips across a casino table. But they were not pushing chips. They were moving small, brightly colored wooden blocks. Each block represented a formation of aircraft. Some were hostile shadows creeping across the water. Others were the young boys we have seen waiting in the grass, now soaring miles above the earth. The women moved the blocks with a calm, fluid grace, sliding them across the painted wood in a slow, silent ballet. The room was filled with a constant, low murmur. Voices from the coastal outposts, from men standing on chalky cliffs with binoculars pressed to their eyes, traveled down the wires and into the headsets of the women. The women would listen to the whispered coordinates, their faces masks of serene concentration, and then they would reach out with their long rakes and slide the wooden blocks a few inches across the painted map. It requires a profound, almost unimaginable level of composure to do this work. To stand in a quiet, artificially lit room, pushing pieces of wood across a table, while knowing with absolute certainty that each movement represents lives suspended in the freezing air. Imagine a young woman standing at her station. Let us call her Alice. The headset presses tightly against her ears. Through the crackle of static, she can hear the voices of the fighter controllers up in the gallery above, calmly issuing vectors. And sometimes, she can hear the boys themselves. The radio channels bleed into one another, and suddenly, the sterile room is filled with the frantic, adrenaline-laced shouts of a young man fighting for his life amongst the clouds. Alice listens. Her hands do not shake. She grips the wooden handle of her rake, her knuckles turning white. On the board in front of her, she sees a cluster of hostile blocks moving steadily toward a single, isolated friendly block. She knows what is happening up there in the blinding sunlight. She knows the boy is alone. She wants to scream. She wants to reach her hand up through the ceiling, through the layers of earth and concrete, and pull the boy out of the sky and safely into her arms. But she cannot. She is entirely powerless to change the outcome. Her only duty is to reflect the truth of the sky onto the painted wood. So, she takes a slow, deep breath, anchoring herself to the solid floor, and she slides the blocks closer together. This is a different kind of bravery. It is the bravery of witnessing. It is the quiet agony of holding the hands of those in danger, but only being able to do it through a wire and a piece of painted wood. When a plane was lost, the radio would fall silent. The blip on the invisible radar screens would simply vanish. In the plotting room, an instruction would be murmured over the headset. Alice would reach out with her wooden rake. She would hook the edge of the wooden block representing the fallen plane. With a gentle, almost reverent pull, she would slide the block off the map, lifting it with her hand, and dropping it into a small wooden tray at her side. Click. The sound of the wood hitting the tray was soft, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation fans. But in the hearts of the women who watched the board, it was louder than thunder. That small, wooden click was the end of a universe. It was a mother's heartbreak, a wife's endless waiting, a friend's empty chair in the mess hall, all condensed into a single, devastating sound. Yet, Alice did not weep. The tears would have to wait. The board was still moving. The sky was still full. She would blink, clear her throat, and look back at the painted coast of France, waiting for the next whisper through the wire. These women carried the psychological weight of the entire battle on their slender shoulders. They absorbed the shockwaves of the sky so that the men in the air could trust the map below. They were the silent architects of survival. And during their fleeting breaks, they found solace in the smallest, most human moments. In a small, cramped tea room just down the corridor, the air was thick with the scent of cheap cigarettes and brewing tea. The women would collapse into the mismatched chairs, slipping the heavy headsets off their bruised ears. They would massage their temples, their faces pale under the harsh electric lights. They shared everything in those brief moments. A tin of shortbread sent from home. A crumpled letter from a brother serving overseas. They would lean their tired heads on one another's shoulders, finding comfort in the simple warmth of a friend's presence. They didn't talk about the wooden blocks. They didn't talk about the clicks in the wooden trays. They talked about the cinema. They talked about the patterns they were knitting. They wove a protective blanket of ordinary life to shield themselves from the extraordinary horror of their work. Sometimes, a young woman would sit quietly in the corner, staring blankly into her teacup. Her friends would know, without asking, that the squadron her husband flew in had been heavily engaged that morning. They wouldn't offer empty platitudes. They would simply pour her another cup of tea, slide a biscuit onto her saucer, and gently rest a hand on her arm. That silent, steadfast solidarity was the only armor they had. The official records often overlook the deep, emotional toll this work took on the women underground. We see the photographs of them looking calm and efficient, pushing their rakes with professional detachment. But the real history is found in the tea room, in the trembling hands hiding under the table, and the silent tears shed only when the shift was finally over. Preserving these deeply personal, unvarnished stories is so vital to truly understanding the humanity of this era. It requires looking beyond the polished narratives to find the raw, sometimes painful truths of those who quietly endured. For those of you who want to explore these deeper, uncensored realities with me, I have created a dedicated space on Patreon. There, we delve into the raw historical narratives, full podcast episodes, and the unfiltered emotional histories that require a more intimate setting than this platform allows. It is also a wonderful way to leave a tip and support the immense research that goes into these documentaries. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. When the long shift finally ended, the transition back to the surface was always a surreal experience. Alice and her friends would climb the steep concrete stairs, their legs heavy, their eyes burning from the dim amber light. The heavy steel doors would be pushed open, and suddenly, they were thrust back into the world. If it was evening, the sunset would hit them like a physical blow. The sky, which for the last 8 hours had existed only as a painted blue surface and sliding wooden blocks, was suddenly vast, real, and breathtakingly beautiful. The cool evening breeze would rush over their faces, smelling of damp grass and earth, entirely erasing the stale, metallic air of the bunker. They would walk together across the fields toward their barracks. The world above ground seemed impossibly peaceful. A farmer in the distance was leading a horse toward a barn. The crickets were beginning their evening song in the tall grass. It felt like a dream. How could the world be so calm, so perfectly ordinary, when they knew exactly how many boys were missing from the clouds? Alice pauses for a moment on the path. She looks up. The first stars are beginning to prick through the velvet twilight. She remembers the coordinates she plotted just hours ago. She remembers the frantic voices bleeding through the static. She reaches into the pocket of her uniform tunic and her fingers brush against a folded piece of paper, a letter she has been carrying all day, unread, waiting for the quiet of her own bed. She closes her eyes, letting the cool wind wash over her. She takes a deep, grounding breath. She does not look at the sky as a battleground anymore. In this quiet, fragile moment, she looks at it simply as the sky. A beautiful, indifferent canopy covering them all. She catches up with her friends, linking arms with the girl next to her. They walk in silence toward the glowing windows of their sleeping quarters. They will sleep deeply, the exhausted, dreamless sleep of those who have carried the weight of the world. And tomorrow, they will descend the concrete stairs once again. They will put on the heavy headsets. They will take up the wooden rakes. And with quiet, unbreakable grace, they will continue to watch the sky, holding the lives of the boys in the clouds within the steady, careful palms of their hands. There is a kind of darkness that falls in the middle of the day, a shadow heavy enough to swallow a city whole. It was the late breath of summer, a time when the leaves in the grand parks just began to consider turning their edges to gold. The people of the sprawling city were used to the distant, echoing wails of the sirens by now. They had heard the whispers from the coastal towns, the quiet rumors of the young boys fighting their lonely battles high above the silver waters of the channel. But the city itself, with its endless labyrinth of stone, brick, and winding streets, had felt like a fortress. It was too vast, too ancient, to ever truly be broken. And then, the gaze of the sky shifted. The sound did not arrive as a sudden thunderclap. It began as a deep, vibrating hum at the very edge of hearing. It was a slow, mechanical thrum that vibrated through the cobblestones, rattled the tea sets in the drawing rooms, and made the surface of the river shiver. People stepped out of their shops. They stood on the pavements, shielding their eyes against the glare of the afternoon, looking up. The sun, previously warm and generous, was suddenly blotted out by a rolling, unnatural twilight. The sky filled with a vast, dark flock, heavy and ominous. They blotted out the blue. They eclipsed the light. It was as if the sun had simply turned black. And then, the great sirens of the city began to sing their mournful, rising chorus. We find ourselves looking at this changed world through the wide, unblinking eyes of a child. He is small, perhaps 7 years old. His hand is tucked entirely within the warm, tight grip of his mother's hand. He is wearing a woolen coat that is slightly too thick for the late summer air, because it is the warmest one he owns, and his mother knows deeply, instinctively, that they will need the warmth where they are going. In his free hand, he clutches a small, scuffed tin toy. A bright red double-decker bus. It is a tiny piece of the normal, sunlit world, carried like a talisman into the gathering dark. They are moving with a quiet, hurried tide of humanity. The streets are flowing with people, carrying blankets, pillows, thermoses of tea, and sleepy toddlers. There is no screaming. There is only a hushed, collective urgency, the sound of thousands of leather soles hurrying across the pavement. They arrive at the entrance to the underground. The familiar glowing sign, usually a beacon for a mundane commute, is now the mouth of a sanctuary. As they begin to descend the steep, curving stairs, the air changes instantly. The warm summer breeze is replaced by a rush of cool, stale wind pushing up from the deep tunnels. It smells of old electricity, of grease, of ozone, and of the metallic dust of the train tracks. And beneath it all, there is the faint, unmistakable scent of human fear, masked by the smell of damp wool and face powder. They go down, deep beneath the skin of the earth. Down past the ticket halls, down the stationary escalators, deeper and deeper until the rumble of the streets above is completely muffled. When they reach the platform, it is already a sea of people. It is a surreal, subterranean village. The white tiles of the curved walls reflect the dim, harsh light of the bare bulbs overhead. The trains have stopped running. The tracks themselves are empty, silent, dark ribbons leading into the absolute blackness of the tunnels. The mother finds a small, empty patch of concrete near the curved wall. She spreads out a heavy tartan blanket, smoothing the rough fabric with her palm. She pulls her little boy down beside her, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, pulling him close against her side. He sits on the hard ground. He looks around. The platform is filled with strangers, but they do not act like strangers anymore. The rigid, polite rules of the city above have dissolved in the damp air of the tunnel. Next to them, an elderly gentleman in a remarkably neat, though slightly dusty, suit is meticulously peeling an apple with a pocket knife. He catches the little boy's eye, smiles a warm, crinkly smile, and offers him a pristine slice of the white fruit. The mother nods her silent thanks. Further down, a young woman is softly playing a harmonica, the melancholic, reedy notes bouncing off the tiled ceiling. A group of teenagers are huddled around a lantern, playing a quiet game of cards, their whispered laughter offering a strange, comforting countermelody to the tension in the air. This is the quiet miracle of the dark. When the sun turned black, the people did not turn on each other. They gathered closer. They shared their meager rations. They shared their blankets. They shared the warmth of simply breathing the same air in the same buried room. But the peace is fragile. Suddenly, the dim lights overhead flicker. They dim to a dull orange, then surge bright, then dim again. And then, the earth moves. It is not a sound. It is a massive, physical blow that travels through the deep soil, through the concrete, and directly into their bones. The platform shudders violently. The little boy gasps, burying his face into his mother's woolen coat. She wraps her arms entirely around him, becoming a human shield, pressing her cheek to the top of his head. She rocks him, back and forth, humming a tune she cannot even hear over the deep, grinding roar from above. Another shudder. This one is closer. Dust, old and gray, shakes loose from the curved ceiling. It falls like a gentle, sinister snow, coating the shoulders of the huddled masses, settling onto the wool blankets, dulling the shine of the old man's shoes. The air grows thick, tasting of chalk and grit. The boy peeks out from the folds of his mother's coat. He watches the dust motes dancing in the flickering, unsteady light. He clutches his tin bust so tightly his knuckles are white. He wonders, in the simple, innocent logic of a child, if the world above has completely vanished. He wonders if there is nothing left up there but the dark. As they sit there in the subterranean shadows, enduring the unimaginable, it is profound to realize how much of survival happens out of sight. While the people sheltered below the earth, and the brave boys fought in the visible skies, there was a whole other world of quiet resilience and hidden operations working desperately in the background. History is full of these unseen layers, the secret, shadowed efforts that ultimately shaped the world we live in today. If you are moved by the hidden stories of resilience and the quiet, unseen heroism of those days, I offer a free weekly email newsletter where we explore these forgotten facts. When you join, I will send you a free ebook titled The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It is a gentle deep dive into the hidden corners of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Hours pass in the belly of the earth. Time loses all meaning. It is measured only in the space between the tremors, in the slow, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping child, and the quiet sips of lukewarm tea from a shared thermos. The boy eventually falls asleep. The human body can only sustain terror for so long before exhaustion demands its toll. He sleeps with his head pillowed on his mother's lap, the tin bus resting quietly by his cheek. The mother does not sleep. She sits with her back against the cold, tiled wall, her eyes open, watching over him. She listens to the shifting sounds of the shelter. A baby crying softly in the distance. The scrape of a match lighting a cigarette. The low, reassuring murmur of a husband speaking into his wife's ear. Slowly, the tremors begin to fade. The deep, grinding roar retreats, rolling away into the distance until it becomes nothing more than a memory vibrating in the concrete. The lights overhead stabilize, burning with a steady, pale glow. A heavy, exhausted silence settles over the platform. And then, filtering down the long, winding tunnels, bouncing off the tiles and the stopped escalators, comes a new sound. It is faint at first. But it is clear. It is the steady, unbroken note of the all-clear siren. A collective breath is exhaled. It is a sound made of 1,000 sighs. The mother gently shakes the little boy's shoulder. He blinks, his eyes heavy with sleep, a smudge of chalky dust across his cheek. "It's time to go up, my love," she whispers. Her voice is dry, but steady. They gather their things. The old man folds his pocket knife. The young woman puts her harmonica in her pocket. They stand up, their limbs stiff from the cold floor. They begin the long, slow climb back up the stairs. There is a deep anxiety in the ascent. What will they find when they reach the top? Will the sun ever shine again? They reach the ticket hall. They walk toward the entrance. When they step out onto the pavement, the world is completely altered. The air is thick with a gray haze, smelling heavily of burning wood, shattered brick, and exploded earth. The streets are littered with debris, sparkling with a million shards of broken glass that catch the light like terrible diamonds. Buildings that stood proud yesterday are now jagged, hollow shells. But the sun is there. It is a pale, milky orb fighting its way through the smoke, but it is shining. It casts long, hazy shadows across the ruined streets. The little boy looks at the broken buildings, and then he looks down at his hand. The red tin bus is still there. He looks up at his mother. Her face is streaked with dust, her hair is loose, but her eyes are fierce, bright, and utterly unbroken. She takes his hand again. She squeezes it gently. They begin to walk through the glass and the rubble. They do not run. They step carefully, moving with a quiet, undeniable dignity. The city around them is wounded, terribly scarred by the night the sky fell. But as the child listens to the steady, unyielding sound of his mother's footsteps on the broken pavement, he knows that the darkness did not win. They are still here. The earth is still firm beneath their feet. And somewhere, above the smoke and the haze, the sky is still waiting for the day. There is a fragile, beautiful magic that happens when the lights go out, and we are left with nothing but each other. If you were to walk through the bustling streets of the city on any ordinary afternoon before the shadows fell, you would see 1,000 private worlds spinning silently past one another. The young baker, his forearms dusted with white flour, hurrying to sweep his step. The elderly woman in the heavy velvet coat, her eyes focused on the pavement, carrying a small tin of tea leaves in her purse. The tired postman, the leather strap of his satchel worn soft by years of carrying the weight of other people's words. In the daylight, they are simply moving shapes in the crowd. They do not meet each other's eyes. They do not know each other's names. But when the great sirens began their mournful wail, and the sun was swallowed by the unnatural twilight of the dust and the smoke, the daylight rules of the world dissolved. Imagine a cellar beneath an old brick building. It was meant for storing coal, perhaps, or wooden crates of winter root vegetables. It was never meant to be a sanctuary. The air down here is heavy and still, smelling of damp earth, old stone, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. The heavy wooden door above has been bolted shut, sealing away the sky. Inside this dark, cramped space, the strangers are gathered. There is a single hurricane lamp resting on an overturned wooden crate in the center of the room. Its wick is turned down low to save the precious oil, casting a soft, flickering amber glow that barely reaches the curved brick walls. In this dim, forgiving light, the edges of the people soften. The distinctions of class, of age, of neighborhood, they all melt away, leaving only the pure, bare essence of humanity. They sit on scattered blankets, on folded winter coats, on the hard, packed dirt floor. For a long time, there is only the sound of breathing. Quick, shallow breaths masking racing hearts. A cough, quickly muffled by a wool sleeve. The distant, terrible thud of the earth shivering somewhere far above them. The young baker sits with his back against the cold wall. His apron is still tied around his waist. In his lap, wrapped carefully in a piece of brown butcher's paper, is a loaf of bread. It is slightly misshapen, baked in a rush before the warning sounded, but it is warm. The sweet, comforting scent of the yeast and the baked crust rises into the damp air, an incredibly out-of-place perfume of absolute normalcy. He looks to his right. Sitting beside him is the elderly woman in the velvet coat. She is sitting very stiffly, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale. She is staring straight ahead at the flickering lamp, her eyes wide, a silent portrait of dignified terror. The baker does not ask if she is hungry. He does not ask her name. He simply unwraps the brown paper. The crust crackles softly in the quiet room. He breaks the loaf in half with his strong, flour-dusted hands, and he gently offers a piece to the woman. She turns her head slowly. She looks at the bread, and then she looks at the young man's face. In the amber light, he just offers a small, quiet nod. The woman raises a trembling, gloved hand. She takes the warm bread. And then, the stiffness leaves her shoulders. A single, silent tear slips down her cheek, catching the lamplight before disappearing into the velvet collar of her coat. She takes a bite. It is a profound communion. In that simple breaking of bread, the dark cellar transforms. It is no longer a room full of frightened strangers waiting for the roof to cave in. It has become a tiny, flickering island of warmth in a sea of destruction. Across the room, the postman watches this quiet exchange. He pulls his heavy leather satchel onto his lap, wrapping his arms around it as if holding a child. Inside the bag are dozens of letters he could not deliver before the sky broke open. He knows the power of the paper he carries. He knows there are words of love, words of comfort, words from the young boys waiting on the grassy aerodromes far out in the countryside. He thinks of those boys right now. He knows they are up there, miles above the brick ceiling of this cellar, weaving through the freezing dark, completely alone in their tiny metal cockpits. He wonders if they know that their courage is not just protecting buildings and bridges, but is protecting this quiet, beautiful moment of shared bread in the dark. The postman reaches into his own coat pocket. His fingers trace the edge of a folded piece of paper, a letter from his own son, tucked away safely. These physical connections to the past are so incredibly important. They anchor these floating memories to the solid world. A piece of a letter, a faded photograph, a brass button, these tangible items help us touch the history that these strangers lived. To hold a piece of the past in your hand is to shake hands with the people who survived it. If you find yourself wanting to hold a piece of this era, to feel the weight of history, or to immerse yourself in the sweeping, emotional stories of those who fought during this time, I warmly recommend exploring the authentic World War II memorabilia available on Amazon, or watching powerful films like Midway that beautifully capture the human spirit amidst the vastness of the conflict. It is a wonderful way to honor their courage in your own home. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the long hours of the night stretch on, the silence in the cellar gives way to a gentle, murmured symphony. In a corner wrapped in shadows, a young mother is rocking a restless infant. The baby whimpers, the sound thin and fragile, echoing off the damp bricks. The mother bounces her child gently, her face etched with a bone-deep exhaustion, humming a tune that keeps faltering on her dry lips. The strangers do not turn away. They do not complain about the noise. Instead, the elderly woman finishes her bread, brushes the crumbs from her velvet lap, and begins to hum along. Her voice is a soft, reedy contralto, trembling slightly with age, but perfectly pitched. The baker picks up the melody, whistling it gently through his teeth. Slowly, the cellar fills with the lullaby. It is a quiet, makeshift chorus born out of absolute necessity. They are weaving a blanket of sound to wrap around the child, to shield it from the heavy thrums vibrating through the soil. The baby's whimpers quiet. The child's eyelids grow heavy, surrendering to the gentle, combined wool of the room, and drifts into a peaceful sleep. The mother looks up. She cannot see their faces clearly in the gloom, but she smiles. A deeply felt, exhausted smile of profound gratitude sent out into the dark. Someone strikes a match. The sudden flare of sulfur is blinding for a moment. An older gentleman is lighting a pipe. The sweet, rich scent of cherry tobacco fills the air, mingling with the yeast of the bread and the damp of the earth. He puffs thoughtfully, the red ember glowing in rhythm with his breath. My father, the man with the pipe, whispers into the dark, his voice low and rich, used to say that the stars only show themselves when the world is completely black. A quiet murmur of agreement ripples through the room. They are no longer just waiting. They are keeping each other company. The postman opens his satchel and pulls out a small thermos. He unscrews the cup and pours a measure of lukewarm, sugary tea. He passes it to the baker, who takes a sip and passes it to the elderly woman. They share the single cup, passing it from hand to hand in the shadows. With every exchange, the invisible walls between them crumble a little more. They begin to talk. Not about the war. Not about the fear. They talk about the things that anchor them to the light. The baker talks about the perfect temperature for proving dough on a winter morning. The older woman tells a story about a dance she attended 50 years ago, describing the exact color of the silk ribbons in her hair. They build a beautiful, fragile architecture of memories in the damp cellar, holding up the roof not with wooden beams, but with the sheer force of their shared humanity. They discover that in the dark, the heart sees much more clearly than the eyes. They realize that they are not alone. The terrible things happening in the sky above cannot touch the quiet grace happening beneath the earth. Hate can shatter stone, and fear can shake the ground, but neither can break the gentle, stubborn thread of kindness that runs between a baker, a postman, a mother, and a stranger in a velvet coat. Eventually, the deep, vibrating rumbles from above begin to space further apart. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere in the cellar slowly begins to lift, like a fever finally breaking. The flame in the hurricane lamp sputters, flickers, and quietly dies, having burned through its oil. They sit in the absolute blackness. But they are not afraid anymore. They can hear the steady, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping child. They can smell the cherry tobacco. They can feel the warmth of the stranger sitting just inches away. And then, faintly, filtering down through the heavy wooden door and the layers of brick, they hear it. The single, unbroken, glorious note of the all-clear. A collective, shuddering sigh fills the room. It is the sound of survival. The baker stands up, his knees popping in the quiet. He reaches out a hand in the dark, and finds the gloved hand of the elderly woman. He helps her to her feet. The postman shoulders his heavy leather bag. The mother holds her sleeping child close to her chest. Someone unbolts the heavy door above. The creak of the hinges is deafening. As the door swings open, the pale, milky light of early dawn spills down the concrete stairs. It is gray and muted, but to the people in the cellar, it is brighter than the midday sun. They blink against the light, shielding their eyes as they slowly climb the stairs. They step out into the street. The air is cold and smells heavily of ash and broken plaster. The city around them is altered, wounded in the night. But the people who step out of the cellar are altered, too. They stand on the pavement for a moment, brushing the brick dust from their coats. They look at each other in the harsh light of morning. The baker with his flowery apron. The postman with his satchel. The woman in her velvet coat. They look tired. They look battered. But they do not look like strangers. They share a final, quiet nod. A silent promise that they will carry this night with them forever. And then, they turn and walk away. The baker goes back to sweep his ruined step. The postman goes to deliver his letters. The mother carries her child home. They dissolve back into the crowd, back into their separate lives, carrying within them a secret, luminous truth. That even when the sky falls, and the world goes completely dark, we will always find a way to light a match, to break the bread, and to hold each other until the morning comes. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that settles not in the muscles, but deep within the marrow of the very bones. By the time the late summer began to bleed its golden hues into the edges of September, the airfields of southern England had taken on a heavy, dreamlike quality. The initial shock of the conflict, the sharp, stinging adrenaline of the early days, had slowly evaporated into the warm air. In its place, something far heavier had settled over the grassy aerodromes. It was a profound, absolute fatigue. A weariness so vast and all-consuming that it changed the way the young men walked, the way they spoke, and the way they looked at the sky. If you were to see these boys now, you would notice that their youth had been temporarily mislaid. The bright, eager eyes that had posed for the early photographs were now shadowed by dark, bruised circles. Their cheeks had grown hollow. The skin around their mouths and noses bore the permanent, red, chafed imprints of their tight rubber oxygen masks, badges of honor worn with quiet resignation. Time had lost its shape. The days of the week no longer held any meaning. There were no Sundays, no weekends, no afternoons off. There was only the light and the dark. The time spent in the air and the time spent waiting to return to it. Imagine the early dawn, the air still damp and cool with dew. In the narrow bunks, the boys are sleeping a sleep so deep it resembles a kind of hibernation. When the heavy wooden door of the barracks is pushed open by an orderly and the soft call to wake is given, they do not jump out of bed. They rise slowly, moving as if submerged in deep water. Every joint aches. Every muscle protests. The simple act of pulling on a thick woolen sock or buttoning a tunic requires a monumental effort of will. They walk out into the pale, misty light. They carry their yellow life preservers and their leather helmets, and these items, which weigh only a few pounds, feel as heavy as cast iron. The sheer weight of the wings they must wear, day after day, is pulling them down into the earth. In the dispersal hut, the atmosphere is utterly subdued. The tea is poured, the sweet, milky steam rising into the quiet air. But the mugs are held in hands that tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the physical limit of human endurance. A boy sits in a sagging armchair, staring blankly at a spot on the floorboards. He holds a piece of toast, half-eaten, resting on his knee. He has fallen asleep with his eyes half open, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock lulling his exhausted mind into a brief, fragile stupor. Beside him, a friend notices. He does not wake him. He simply reaches over, gently takes the piece of toast from his loosening grip, and sets it on the table so it won't fall. He pulls a discarded leather flying jacket over the sleeping boy's shoulders, tucking it softly against his neck. It is a moment of profound, quiet tenderness. They are brothers bound by an unimaginable weariness, caring for each other in the only ways they can. When the scramble bell rings now, there is no sudden jolt of electricity. The adrenaline reserves were drained weeks ago. Instead, there is a collective, heavy sigh. They rise from their chairs, pushing themselves up with hands pressed flat against their thighs. They move with a practiced, mechanical efficiency. They walk to their machines. The mechanics are waiting, their faces equally pale, equally drawn. As the pilot climbs onto the wing, his boot slips. He is just so incredibly tired. The mechanic catches his elbow, steadying him, holding the boy's weight for just a moment. They exchange a silent look. No words are needed. The mechanic helps him down into the narrow cockpit, reaching over to pull the heavy harness straps over the boy's shoulders, buckling them securely over his chest. It feels like being strapped into a familiar, suffocating embrace. The engine roars to life, sending that deep, bone-rattling vibration through the airframe. Once they are airborne, the exhaustion takes on a different form. The sky is blindingly bright, the sun glaring off the perspex canopy. The cold of the high altitudes, which used to shock them awake, now just seeps into their joints, making them feel slow and heavy. They fly on instinct. Their hands and feet make the necessary, tiny adjustments to the controls without a single conscious thought. They are extensions of the machine, or perhaps the machine has become an extension of their own weary bodies. In the space between engagements, when the sky is empty and the radio is filled only with the hiss of static, the urge to close their eyes is overwhelming. The drone of the great Merlin engine is a steady, hypnotic lullaby. To simply let the chin drop to the chest, to let the heavy eyelids fall shut just for a minute, is a temptation that requires every ounce of their remaining strength to fight. They pinch their own arms. They sing softly to themselves beneath the rubber masks. They stare at the small, faded photographs of their families taped to the instrument panels, using love as an anchor to keep themselves awake in the freezing void. We are so accustomed to the polished, heroic narratives of this time. We see the pristine paintings of silver planes in the clouds, the confident smiles on the recruitment posters. But those images mask the raw, painful reality of the physical toll. The true history is written in the hollow eyes, the trembling hands, and the unwashed hair of the boys who flew 5 times a day on sheer willpower. To truly honor them, we must look at the unvarnished truth of their sacrifice. If you want to connect with the deeply human, unfiltered reality of these days, I have put together a special collection of unseen media and raw, unedited images on Gumroad. These are the rare, candid moments that capture the true exhaustion and the quiet resilience of the men and women on the ground and in the air. It brings a profound, moving depth to the history we share. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. When the patrol is over, the return to Earth is the hardest part of all. The adrenaline, what little there was, completely vanishes the moment the wheels touch the grass. The plane rolls to a stop, the engine coughing and finally falling silent. The sudden absence of the noise leaves a ringing vacuum in their ears. The pilot pushes the canopy back. He pulls off the rubber mask and the heavy leather helmet. But he doesn't immediately stand up. He just sits there in the open air, the gentle summer breeze moving through his damp hair. His arms are so heavy he can barely lift them to unbuckle the harness. He feels as though gravity has somehow doubled its pull on his body. The ground crew arrives. A young rigger climbs onto the wing. He doesn't ask how the patrol went. He doesn't ask if the boy is all right. He simply reaches down, unfastens the heavy metal clasps of the parachute harness, and offers his hand. The pilot takes it, pulling himself up from the seat. His legs wobble as he steps onto the wing, and then down onto the solid, unmoving earth. He walks away from the plane, leaving the mechanics to patch the holes and refuel the tanks. He walks slowly toward the dispersal hut, his boots dragging through the grass, leaving dark trails in the dew. Inside the hut, he finds a quiet corner. He pulls a piece of crumpled paper and a fountain pen from his pocket. He promised his mother he would write. He unscrews the cap, resting the paper on a wooden table. He stares at the blank page. What can he possibly say? He cannot tell her that his hands are shaking so badly he can barely hold the pen. He cannot tell her that he fell asleep in the cockpit today. He cannot tell her how incredibly, desperately tired he is. So, he grips the pen tightly, forcing his hand to remain steady. My dearest mother, he writes, the blue ink flowing onto the page. I am doing very well. The weather continues to be remarkably fine. Please do not worry about me. We are getting plenty of rest, and the food is perfectly agreeable. He writes the gentle lies, shielding her from the reality of the weight he carries. He folds the paper, seals it in an envelope, and writes her address with meticulous, painstaking care. He rests his forehead against the cool wood of the table, just for a moment. He closes his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he still sees the blinding blue of the sky. He still feels the heavy vibration of the engine in his chest. The sky has become a part of him, an immovable weight resting squarely on his shoulders. Eventually, the long day ends. The sun finally dips below the horizon, taking its relentless glare with it. The twilight arrives, soft and cool, painting the aerodrome in shades of forgiving gray and deep lavender. The boys walk back to the barracks. The air is still. The war in the heavens is paused for the night. They enter the narrow room, filled with the scent of wool and weary bodies. They do not talk. They strip off their heavy boots, letting them fall to the wooden floor with a dull thud. They do not bother to undress further. They simply collapse onto the narrow iron beds, pulling the scratchy gray blankets up over their shoulders. Within seconds, they are asleep. It is a heavy, dreamless, consuming sleep. It is the only true refuge they have left. Outside, the stars come out, shining coldly over the silent fields. The planes sit in the shadows of the hangars, their engines cooling, their metal resting. For these few, quiet hours, the weight of the wings is finally unbuckled. The sky is empty. The heavy burden of survival is set down upon the earth, and the boys are allowed to simply breathe, gathering whatever fragile strength they can find in the dark, before the dawn breaks and the heavy lifting must begin all over again. There is a moment when the fever breaks, a quiet softening of the air that tells you the worst of the storm has finally passed. The light begins to change. The harsh, blinding gold of the long summer softens into the pale, watery amber of late September. The air carries a new chill, crisp and clean, sweeping away the heavy, suffocating heat that had settled over the fields and the cities. The leaves on the great oak trees begin to curl at their edges, tinged with rust and copper. The world is slowly, gently turning. And with the turning of the earth, the relentless tide in the sky begins, ever so quietly, to recede. For months, the people of the island had lived in a state of suspended animation. They had learned to breathe in shallow gasps, their shoulders permanently hunched, bracing themselves from the first light of dawn until the heavy curtain of dusk. They expected the deep hum of the engines. They expected the sudden, mournful wail of the sirens. It had become the terrible rhythm of their lives. But on one particular day, as the morning mist clung stubbornly to the valleys and the dew lay heavy on the grass, the expected roar simply did not come. Down in the deep, chalky bunkers, the women who watched the sky stood around the great wooden map. Their hands, usually a blur of constant, anxious motion, were completely still. The long wooden rakes rested gently against the edges of the painted table. They looked at the blue expanse of the channel. Usually, by this hour, the sea was crowded with hostile wooden blocks, a slow-moving wave of danger pushing steadily towards the coast. But today, the board was startlingly, beautifully bare. A young woman named Alice, standing with her heavy headset pressed to her ear, listened to the static. She waited for the sharp, urgent voices of the coastal observers. She waited for the whispered coordinates of impending danger. But the voices that crackled through the wire were calm. They reported empty skies. They reported nothing but seagulls, sea mist, and high, drifting clouds. Alice looked across the table at a friend. They didn't smile, not yet. The hope was too new, too incredibly fragile to trust. But they allowed their shoulders to drop, just a fraction of an inch. They allowed themselves a single, deep, trembling breath of the cool, underground air. The wooden blocks remained in their trays. The silence in the room was no longer the heavy silence of anticipation, it was the soft, breathing silence of peace. Up on the surface, on the dew-soaked grass of the aerodromes, the confusion was palpable. The young men were sitting in the dispersal huts, fully dressed in their heavy flying gear. Their yellow life preservers were fastened tight over their chests, their thick boots laced against the morning chill. They were ready for the scramble bell. They had lived their entire existence governed by its violent electrical shriek. The clock on the wooden wall ticked. 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock. 11. The tea on the wooden table grew cold in their porcelain mugs. A boy who had been nervously tapping a pencil against the arm of his chair slowly stopped. He just stared at the black telephone on the desk. It sat there, silent, dormant, and entirely harmless. What do you do when the war simply forgets to arrive? The silence outside was so absolute it felt heavy, almost confusing. A few of the boys wandered slowly out of the hut. They stood on the damp grass, looking up at the vast, unbroken canopy of blue. They squinted against the light, searching the familiar corners of the sky for the dark specks they had fought for so long, but there was only the gentle drift of white vapor. A mechanic, holding a heavy iron wrench, stood by the wing of a resting fighter plane. He looked at the pilot standing in the grass. The pilot looked back. A slow, hesitant realization began to pass between them, a quiet understanding woven into the cool breeze. The sky was theirs again. The desperate, lung-burning sprint was over. The pilot reached into his pocket, pulled out a peppermint, and popped it into his mouth, the simple, ordinary flavor grounding him to a world that was suddenly, miraculously, no longer on fire. In a small village miles away, a baker stepped out of his shop. He wiped his flour-dusted hands on his white apron and looked down the quiet, cobbled street. The air raid siren, mounted on a wooden pole near the post office, sat quietly against the autumn sky. It had not sung its rising wail all morning. The baker closed his eyes. He listened to the gentle rustle of the wind in the elm trees. He listened to the distant, cheerful shout of a child playing in a garden, chasing a stray dog. He realized, with a sudden, profound swelling in his chest, that he was simply standing outside on a Tuesday morning, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he was not afraid. It is these incredibly quiet moments that define the true endurance of the human spirit. The slow unclenching of the heart, the quiet realization that the darkest night has finally given way to the dawn. It is a fragile, beautiful relief. Weaving these delicate moments together, finding the soft sighs of history hidden beneath the loud roar of the past, is a journey that requires so much patience and tender care. It takes countless hours of quiet research to bring these gentle echoes back to life. If you find comfort in these stories, and if you feel moved to support the delicate work of preserving them, I have a small tip jar over on Ko-Fi. Even a gesture as small as $1 is like a gentle breeze, helping to keep this channel afloat and ensuring these deeply human histories continue to be shared. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the afternoon stretched into a peaceful, golden evening, a beautiful shift began to occur in the letters being written across the island. For so long, the letters tucked into the dark drawers of barracks and slipped into the red postboxes on street corners had been veiled goodbyes. They had been filled with a quiet, desperate finality, written by hands that did not know if they would ever hold a pen again. But now, in the golden, forgiving light of this quiet day, the ink began to tell a completely different story. A young pilot sat at a small wooden desk in his room, the window pushed open to let in the sweet scent of the cooling earth. He picked up his fountain pen. He did not write to his mother about the bravery of his friends, or the terrible, unseen things hidden in the clouds. Instead, he wrote about the future. He wrote, "The air is getting quite crisp here in the mornings. I think I shall need you to send my thicker woolen socks soon." He paused, looking out at the peaceful, empty field, watching the shadows of the hangars stretch across the grass. Then he wrote, "I think I might be able to come home for a few days around Christmas. We can walk the dog down by the river, just like we used to." Christmas. It was a word that had felt impossible, almost foolish to think about, just a week ago. It was a promise of tomorrow. It was a tether thrown far out into the future, anchoring his weary soul to a life beyond the aerodrome, beyond the canvas and the metal. He folded the letter carefully, sealing a quiet, profound hope inside the envelope. He smoothed the paper with his thumb, feeling the sudden, overwhelming weight of a life that had been handed back to him. This was the fracture in the tide. It was not marked by a grand parade down a city street or a sweeping, triumphant speech over the wireless radio. It was marked by the simple, beautiful return of ordinary, mundane things. It was a mother allowing her child to play in the garden just a little bit longer as the sun went down, not ushering them quickly toward the corrugated iron shelter. It was a mechanic taking the time to carefully polish the glass of a cockpit canopy, moving slowly, knowing the machine wouldn't be rushed into the violent sky the very next moment. It was the collective, exhausted, tear-stained sigh of an entire island realizing that they had held the line, and the line had not broken. The sun dips below the horizon now, painting the scattered, high clouds in soft, forgiving shades of peach and lavender. The shadows lengthen across the grass, wrapping the world in a comforting embrace. The planes rest silently in their hangars, their engines completely cold, their metal cool and still to the touch. The boys in the barracks pull their blankets up to their chins and fall asleep. But tonight, it is not the heavy, desperate, dreamless exhaustion of pure survival. It is the gentle, healing rest of those who know the storm has finally broken. The wind has changed. The vast sky above them is quiet, empty, and safe. And in the soft, enveloping dark of the autumn night, the heart of the world finally, peacefully, begins to heal. Peace does not arrive with a triumphant shout, but with a profound and bewildering quiet. Imagine waking up in a narrow iron bed, the rough gray wool of the blanket pulled tight beneath your chin. For months, your morning has begun before the sun, shattered by the violent, electrical shriek of the scrambled bell or the heavy, vibrating thrum of distant bombers shaking the floorboards. You wake with your muscles already tensed, your heart already racing, your lungs already braced for the thin, freezing air of the high altitudes. But on this morning, you open your eyes, and there is nothing but the soft, golden light of early autumn spilling across the wooden floor. The boy in the bed does not move. He lies perfectly still, staring up at the familiar cracks in the plaster ceiling. He is listening. He strains his ears, waiting for the siren, waiting for the shout of the orderly, waiting for the heavy thud of boots running across the grass. He holds his breath, suspended in that agonizing space between sleep and terror. But the silence holds. It stretches out, long and unbroken. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he turns his head. The clock on the wall ticks with a gentle, rhythmic cadence. The dust motes dance lazily in the sunbeam. Outside the window, a small bird is singing a clear, trilling song. It is a sound so ordinary, so breathtakingly normal, that it feels entirely out of place. He realizes, with a slow, creeping sense of disbelief, that the sky is empty. He pushes the blanket aside and swings his legs over the edge of the bed. His body is so deeply conditioned to urgency that moving slowly feels like a forgotten language. He pulls on his trousers, his thick woolen socks, his worn leather boots. He does not reach for his yellow life preserver. He leaves his leather flying helmet hanging on the wooden peg by the door. He steps out of the barracks and into the cool morning air. The world is washed in the pale, watery light of the new season. A heavy dew clings to the tall grass, turning the airfield into a shimmering sea of silver. The air smells of damp earth, fallen leaves, and cold moisture. It does not smell of high-octane fuel. It does not smell of cordite or burning metal. He walks toward the dispersal area, his boots leaving dark, wet trails in the grass. There is no one running. There is no frantic, desperate sprint toward the machines. The great fighter planes are sitting quietly outside the hangars, their noses pointing toward the empty sky. They look different this morning. For so long, they have been terrifying beasts of burden, roaring and vibrating with lethal energy. But now, resting in the damp grass, covered in a fine layer of morning mist, they look like sleeping giants. A mechanic is standing near the wing of a plane, holding a clean rag in his hand. He is not frantically twisting a wrench or hurriedly patching a bullet hole. He is simply wiping the moisture from the perspex canopy, moving his hand in slow, gentle circles. The pilot walks up to him. They do not speak. The pilot reaches out and rests his bare hand against the metal cowling of the engine. It is stone cold. The silence of the engine is the loudest sound in the world. For months, that deep, resonant roar has been the soundtrack of their survival. It has been a lullaby, a battle cry, and a constant companion. To feel the metal completely still, entirely devoid of heat and vibration, sends a strange shiver down the pilot's spine. He traces the smooth curve of the propeller blade with his fingertips. He feels a sudden, overwhelming wave of affection for this machine, this beautiful construction of wood and canvas and metal that has carried him through the dark and brought him safely back to the earth. The transition from absolute war to a sudden, fragile peace is not easy. It does not feel like victory. It feels like a sudden loss of gravity. The boys wander around the aerodrome like ghosts. They gather in the mess hall, sitting in the mismatched armchairs, holding mugs of warm tea. They talk, but their voices are hushed, as if they are afraid that speaking too loudly might wake the storm sleeping across the channel. They do not know what to do with their hands. For so long, their hands have been gripped around the control column, or pressing the firing button, or white-knuckled against the armrests of a waiting chair. Now, they sit loosely in their laps. A boy takes a deck of cards and begins to shuffle them, the soft flutter of the paper snapping loudly in the quiet room. Another stares out the window, watching a solitary leaf detach from a branch and drift lazily to the ground. They are carrying an invisible, unbearable weight. The history books often give us the polished version of this silence, painting it as a tidy ending to a chapter of struggle. But the true, uncensored stories of what these young men and women carried in those quiet hours, their raw letters, their unvarnished truths, and the deep, silent trauma of simply surviving, are deeply profound. Exploring these unfiltered narratives requires a space where we can look at history without the polish. If you find yourself wanting to sit longer with these deeply human, raw stories, I warmly invite you to join our Patreon community. There, we share uncensored content, full podcast episodes, and deeply moving deep dives that we simply cannot place on this platform. It is a quiet corner for history lovers to gather, and a place where you can use the tip jar to help support the immense research that goes into these documentaries. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the morning stretches into the afternoon, the quiet begins to sink a little deeper into their bones. The pilot who touched the cold engine retreats to a quiet corner of the dispersal hut. He finds a piece of paper, a stray pencil, and pulls a small wooden stool up to a table. He wants to write a letter, but the words escape him. How do you describe the feeling of a cold engine to someone who has never heard it roar? How do you explain that you are safe, but you still feel the phantom echo of the sky pulling at your chest? He begins to write to a girl he left behind in a town miles away. The sky is very clear today, he writes, the graphite scratching softly against the paper. The strangest thing has happened. The birds have come back to the field. I watched a sparrow land on the wing of my plane this morning. It just sat there, preening its feathers, entirely unafraid. I think, perhaps, we might be able to go for that walk along the river soon. He stops. He looks at the words. A walk along the river. It is such a small, mundane thing, but right now, it feels like an impossible luxury. He realizes that for the first time in an eternity, he is actually making a plan for tomorrow. He is not just hoping to survive the next hour, he is looking forward to the next week. The realization brings a sudden, sharp sting of tears to his eyes. He blinks them away quickly, burying his face in his hands, letting out a long, shuddering breath that he has been holding since the summer began. In the late afternoon, the ground crews begin to secure the machines. They drape heavy canvas covers over the cockpits, tying them down with thick ropes. They move with a quiet reverence, tucking the planes in for the night like tired children. There is no frantic refueling, no loading of ammunition belts. There is only the gentle, methodical work of preservation. The mechanics wipe the oil from their hands. They lean against the wooden walls of the hangars, smoking cigarettes, watching the sun begin to dip toward the horizon. They share a quiet camaraderie, a brotherhood forged in the dark hours of midnight repairs. They look at the boys walking back toward the barracks, their shoulders finally beginning to drop from their ears, their steps a little less heavy. When evening falls, the mess hall fills with a warm, amber light. The radio in the corner is playing a soft, sweeping orchestral piece. The tea is poured, and the plates of food are passed around. But as they sit at the tables, the quiet reveals something else. It reveals the empty spaces. During the relentless noise of the battle, there was no time to truly look at the empty chairs. The grief was pushed down, buried beneath adrenaline and duty. But now, in the silence of the engines, the ghosts of the summer come softly into the room. The boys look at the spaces where their friends used to sit. They remember a laugh, a shared joke, a piece of chocolate broken in half. They do not weep openly. They honor their friends with a quiet, dignified remembrance. A boy raises his teacup slightly toward an empty chair, a silent, solitary toast. Another rests his hand gently on the table where a friend used to carve his initials into the wood. They carry their fallen brothers in the quiet spaces of their hearts, knowing that the peace they are sitting in tonight was bought with the unimaginable price of those empty chairs. The night deepens. The aerodrome is completely swallowed by the dark. There are no searchlights sweeping the clouds, no sirens wailing in the distance. There is only the vast, unfathomable expanse of the starry sky, stretching out like a peaceful canopy over the sleeping earth. The boys return to their narrow iron beds. They lie down, pulling the ruffled blankets over their tired bodies. The air is cool and still. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, they close their eyes without bracing for the scramble bell. They let their breathing slow, matching the gentle, rhythmic ticking of the clock. Outside, the great engines remain perfectly silent. The metal grows cold under the starlight. The wings cast long, still shadows across the damp grass. The war has retreated, leaving behind a world that is bruised, exhausted, but incredibly, miraculously whole. And as the boys finally slip into a deep, untroubled slumber, the silence wraps around them like a protective embrace, holding them safe, and letting them simply rest upon the quiet earth. A city does not weep when it is broken, it simply gathers its dust and waits for the morning sun. When the heavy, dark curtain of the night finally lifts, and the long, mournful wail of the all-clear siren fades into the damp air, a strange and fragile silence settles over the streets. It is not the peaceful silence of a sleeping village, nor is it the empty silence of a lonely field. It is a heavy, holding your breath kind of quiet. It is the silence of millions of beating hearts, slowly emerging from the earth, blinking up at a sky that has finally stopped falling. Imagine the pale, milky light of an autumn dawn struggling to pierce through a thick, suspended haze. The air in the city does not smell of morning dew or baker's yeast today. It smells of pulverized brick, ancient mortar, scorched timber, and the sharp, metallic tang of torn iron. A fine, gray dust covers absolutely everything. It lies over the cobblestones like a strange, warm snow. It dusts the dark green leaves of the surviving elm trees, and it coats the black iron railings of the parks. As the light grows stronger, the shadows retreat, revealing the true shape of the night. A street that, just yesterday, was a neat, orderly row of Victorian terraces is now a jagged, unfamiliar landscape. The facades of the buildings have been stripped away, leaving the intimate, private spaces of ordinary lives entirely exposed to the morning chill. You can see a bedroom suspended in mid-air, the floral wallpaper peeling, a brass bed frame clinging precariously to the remaining floorboards. You can see a parlor where a framed painting still hangs on a lone, standing wall, miraculously perfectly straight. It is a terrifying, surreal sight. And yet, the people do not stand in the streets and scream. There is a profound, almost unimaginable stoicism that takes hold in the quiet hours of the morning. Doors open, some attached to houses, some leading to nothing but rubble, and the people step out. They are covered in the same gray dust that coats the streets. It is in their hair, and the creases of their coats, lining the weary, deep-set lines around their eyes. An older man, perhaps in his late 60s, walks down the pavement. He wears a woolen vest and a flat cap, his hands tucked deep into his pockets. He is walking toward his shop. It is a small tailor's shop that has stood on this corner for 3 decades. He knows every crack in the pavement leading up to his door. As he approaches, he sees that the large, beautiful pane of glass that used to display his neatly pressed suits is gone. The wooden frame is splintered. Inside, the shelves are covered in a thick layer of plaster, and the mannequins have been knocked to the floor. He stops. He looks at the ruin of his life's work. He takes a slow, deep breath, the dust catching slightly in the back of his throat. He does not turn back. He carefully steps over the wooden debris, the broken glass crunching loudly beneath his leather boots. He walks to the back room, opens a small wooden cupboard that somehow survived the tremor, and takes out a broom with stiff, worn bristles. He returns to the front step. And he begins to sweep. Swish. Scrape. Swish. Scrape. It is a slow, rhythmic, deeply calming sound. It is the sound of defiance, disguised as an ordinary chore. The older man sweeps the glass from the pavement, pushing the jagged, glittering shards into the gutter. He clears a path. He is creating order out of absolute chaos, one sweep of the bristles at a time. A neighbor walks past, carrying a bucket of water. She pauses, looking at the empty window frame. She catches the tailor's eye. They do not exchange grand words of patriotism or resilience. "Bit of a draft today, Arthur," she says softly, a gentle, weary smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Just letting the fresh air in, Mary," he replies, leaning on his broom for a moment. He reaches into his pocket, finds a piece of chalk, and walks over to a large piece of unbroken wood leaning against the brickwork. With a steady hand, he writes, more open than usual. "Business as before." This is the everyday heroism that held the world together. It was not found in the cockpits of the fighter planes, nor was it plotted on the great wooden maps underground. It was found in the soft, rhythmic swish of a broom on a shattered street. It was the quiet, stubborn refusal to let the destruction break the gentle rhythm of ordinary life. A few streets away, the postman is making his rounds. His leather satchel is heavy against his hip. The route he has walked for 20 years is nearly unrecognizable. Street signs have been blown away. Familiar landmarks have been reduced to mounds of smoking brick. Yet, he navigates by memory, guided by the shapes of the ancient curbs and the remaining, scarred trunks of the oak trees. He stops in front of a house that is missing its entire roof. The upper floor is a tangle of broken beams and hanging slate. But the front step is still there, and the front door, though scratched and battered, is still standing within its frame. Sitting on that front step is a woman. She has salvaged a small, portable spirit stove from the wreckage of her kitchen. She is boiling water in a small tin pot. Beside her, resting on a brick, are 2 chipped porcelain teacups and a small tin of precious tea leaves. The postman approaches slowly. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a white envelope. The paper feels incredibly delicate, incredibly clean in this world of dust and stone. "Morning, Mrs. Higgins," he says, his voice a soft rumble. "I have a letter for you. From the north, it looks like." The woman looks up. Her face is pale with exhaustion, but her eyes are remarkably bright. She wipes her dust-covered hands on her apron before reaching out to take the envelope. She touches the familiar handwriting on the front, a wave of quiet relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispers. She places the letter carefully in her lap. Then, she looks at the bubbling water on the small stove. She looks at the postman, whose shoulders are slumped beneath the weight of his bag and the weight of the morning. "I've just put the kettle on," she says, her voice gentle and warm. "Would you care for a cup?" They sit together on the front step of a ruined house, entirely surrounded by the wreckage of a broken city, drinking warm, sweet tea from chipped porcelain cups. They watch the pale sun climb higher in the hazy sky. They talk about the chill in the air, and they talk about the birds that have bravely returned to sing in the soot-stained trees. They wrap their cold hands around the warm cups, finding in that simple, shared warmth a profound and unshakable comfort. The stone around them may be scarred, the beams may be broken, but the invisible threads that connect them to one another are stronger than iron. It is these hidden, invisible threads of resilience that truly turned the tide. So much of the strength that won the war was never seen in the headlines or captured in the dramatic photographs. It was fought in the quiet shadows, in the secret corridors, and in the unyielding, everyday courage of ordinary people. Understanding these unseen layers brings a completely new depth to how we view the history of this time. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden corners of the past, I would love to share something special with you. I offer a free weekly email newsletter where we explore these forgotten facts and hidden heroes, and when you join, I will send you a free ebook titled The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. It is a gentle, fascinating journey into the secrets that shaped the world. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the day stretches on, the children begin to emerge. To a child, the broken city is not just a tragedy, it is a strange, new landscape waiting to be understood. They step out of the dark cellars, blinking against the light. They wear short trousers and scuffed shoes, their knees already dirty from the dust. They do not play loud, boisterous games today. They move quietly among the rubble. They are looking for treasures. They pick up pieces of twisted, jagged metal, shrapnel from the night before. The metal is completely cold now. They turn the strange, jagged shapes over in their small hands. To them, these are not fragments of danger, they are strange, fallen stars. They collect them in their pockets, trading them with one another in hushed voices, neutralizing the terror of the night by turning its remnants into curious trinkets. And in the quiet moments of the afternoon, the woman on the front step, Mrs. Higgins, opens her letter. It is from her son. He is a young mechanic at one of the grassy aerodromes far away from the city. She uses a salvaged hardcover book as a desk, resting it on her knees. She finds a stub of a pencil in her apron pocket. And she begins to write back. She does not tell him that the roof is gone. She does not tell him about the terrible noise, or the suffocating dust, or the fear that gripped her heart in the dark. My dearest boy, she writes, the pencil moving softly across the paper. We are all quite well here. The city is a bit messy today, but Arthur down the street has already swept the pavement, and the sun is shining beautifully. Please do not worry about your old mother. Make sure you are wearing your scarf in the mornings, as the air is getting terribly crisp. She folds the letter, a fragile, paper shield designed to protect her boy from the truth of her reality. Just as he works through the freezing nights to patch the wings of the planes that protect her from the sky, she patches her words to protect him from the sorrow of the ground. It is a beautiful, reciprocal heroism, built entirely on love and quiet sacrifice. Look closely at the great stone buildings that survived the night. Look at the ancient churches, the grand libraries, the stone bridges arching over the gray river. If you trace your hand along their thick, ancient walls, you will feel the scars. The stone is pockmarked, gouged, and chipped. There are deep, jagged craters where the flying metal struck the granite. The buildings look as though they have aged 1,000 years in a single night. But they are still standing. They carry their wounds openly, not as marks of defeat, but as profound testaments to endurance. They are silent witnesses to the night the sky fell. Over time, the rain will wash the black soot from these scars. Soft, green moss will eventually find its way into the crevices, softening the sharp edges of the stone. The scars will become a part of the city's tapestry, woven into the very fabric of its history. As the afternoon turns toward evening, the pale sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the dusty sky in soft, bruised shades of lavender and dull gold. The sweeping stops. The postman finishes his route. The children empty their pockets of the cold, twisted metal, leaving the fallen stars in neat little piles by their doorways. The people begin to retreat. They do not go to their airy, upstairs bedrooms. They gather their heavy blankets, their thermoses of tea, and their quiet fears, and they head back down into the cellars, the shelters, and the deep, tiled tunnels of the underground. But as they descend into the dark, there is a subtle shift in the air. The heavy, suffocating dread of the previous night has been replaced by something else. It is a quiet, weary, but absolute resolve. They lived through the dark. They saw the sun rise. They swept the glass, they boiled the water, they drank the tea, and they wrote the letters. They looked at the scarred stone of their city, and they saw their own reflections. Wounded, exhausted, covered in the pale dust of a broken world, but entirely, beautifully, unbreakably alive. They close the heavy cellar doors. They light the small, flickering lamps. They sit close together in the shadows, listening to the quiet breathing of their neighbors. The night may bring the sirens again. The sky may once again roar with the sound of the engines. But the people of the scarred city close their eyes with a peaceful, stubborn grace, knowing that no matter how dark the sky becomes, the stone will hold, the broom will sweep, and the morning will always, inevitably, return. There is a particular chill in the autumn wind that has nothing to do with the approaching winter, and everything to do with memory. When the frantic, breathless pace of the summer finally slowed, and the skies above the English coast began to clear, a new season quietly took hold. The vibrant, sun-drenched green of the aerodromes faded into the muted coppers, golds, and burnt umbers of October. The air lost its heavy, humid grip, replaced by a crisp, biting clarity that smelled of wood smoke and damp fallen leaves. The great, roaring storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt incredibly still. But for the young men who had lived in the heart of the tempest, the quiet was its own kind of burden. In the pale, slanted light of an autumn morning, a young pilot stands before a small, cracked mirror resting on a wooden washstand. He splashes cold water onto his face, the shock of it grounding him in the present moment. He reaches for a towel, presses it to his skin, and then, he stops. He just looks at his own reflection. He is 21 years old. According to the calendar, only a few short months have passed since he first arrived at this grassy airfield, a boy with a fresh uniform and a heart full of nervous, soaring ambition. But the face looking back at him in the speckled glass does not belong to a boy anymore. The summer has taken his youth and hidden it away. He sees the deep, bruised shadows beneath his eyes, shadows that a full night of sleep can no longer erase. He sees the new, fine lines etched around his mouth, carved by the tight grip of the oxygen mask and the heavy, constant weight of holding his breath in the freezing clouds. He traces the contour of his cheekbone with a slow, hesitant finger. He survived. He is here, breathing the cool autumn air. But he knows, with a quiet, settling certainty, that he has aged a lifetime since June. He walks out of the barracks and steps onto the frost-tipped grass. The airfield is wrapped in a gentle, rolling mist, softening the hard edges of the hangars and the resting machines. It is beautiful, this peaceful morning. But as he walks, he is not alone. He is accompanied by the ghosts of the summer. These are not frightening spirits. They are not the haunting specters of a nightmare. They are the gentle, lingering echoes of the boys who stood on this very grass just a few weeks ago. They are the memories that catch in the throat when the wind blows a certain way, or when a particular song crackles to life on the mess hall gramophone. He passes the dispersal hut, and his mind plays a gentle, cruel trick on him. For a fraction of a second, he hears it. The sudden, raucous laughter of his best friend, spilling out from the open doorway. He remembers the exact sound of it, bright, infectious, entirely fearless. He remembers how his friend would lean back in the sagging armchair, balancing a teacup on his knee, telling grand, exaggerated stories about the girls he had danced with in London. The pilot stops. He closes his eyes and lets the memory wash over him. He can almost smell the distinct, sweet scent of the cherry tobacco his friend used to smoke. He can almost feel the reassuring clap of a hand on his shoulder. He stands there in the mist, holding his breath, wanting to preserve the illusion for just 1 second longer. But then a real breeze sweeps across the field, rustling the canvas of a nearby tent, and the laughter fades back into the silence of the autumn morning. This is the quiet ache of survivor's guilt. It does not shout, It whispers. It asks questions in the middle of the night that have no answers. Why did my engine catch, and his falter? Why did the sun blind the enemy when I turned, but not when he did? Why am I walking on this frost-covered grass, watching the leaves turn gold, while he must stay forever in the summer? There is a profound, melancholic beauty in carrying these memories. The surviving pilots became the silent keepers of their fallen brothers' stories. They held on to the small, seemingly insignificant details, because those details were the very proof that these boys had lived, and laughed, and loved. In the evenings, when the fire was built up high in the mess hall hearth, the survivors would sit together in the dim amber light. They didn't always talk. Sometimes, the shared silence was the only language that made any sense. But occasionally, someone would speak a name. Do you remember the time Tommy tried to fix the phonograph with a butter knife? Someone would murmur, staring into the dancing flames. And a soft, collective chuckle would ripple through the room. I remember, another would reply. Ruined the needle completely. They would talk about Tommy, or Arthur, or William. They would speak their names with a gentle, protective reverence, weaving their memories into the warm air of the room. In doing so, they kept them alive. They ensured that the empty chairs were not truly empty, but filled with the enduring light of remembrance. We seek out tangible things to help us hold onto these fading echoes. A photograph, a worn piece of canvas, a small token carried in a pocket, these physical artifacts bridge the gap between the past and the present, anchoring the ghosts of history into something we can touch. Sometimes, holding a physical piece of that era, or seeing the vast, emotional landscape of those days brought to life on screen, helps us process the profound weight of their sacrifice. If you find yourself wanting to connect more deeply with the physical memory of this era, to hold a tribute in your own hands or watch it unfold in your home, I highly recommend exploring the collection of World War II memorabilia available on Amazon, or watching beautifully crafted, emotionally resonant films like Midway, which capture the sprawling human spirit of the time. It is a wonderful way to keep their stories present in your life. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the days grew shorter, and the afternoon light took on a deeper, more melancholic hue, the process of unlearning the war began. It takes time for the body to realize it is safe. A sudden, sharp noise, a door slamming in the wind, a mechanic dropping a heavy wrench on the concrete, would send a jolt of pure, electric adrenaline straight through a pilot's heart. His hands would twitch, reaching for a control column that wasn't there. His eyes would instantly dart toward the sky, searching the clouds for a shadow. It would take a few long, shaky breaths to remind himself that the sound was just a door, just a wrench, just the harmless clatter of peace. The letters they wrote home during this time were different. They were no longer the brief, reassuring notes of the summer, designed to hide the terror. They were longer, more reflective. They were the letters of young men trying to figure out how to fold themselves back into the shape of ordinary life. A pilot sits at a small wooden desk, the autumn sunlight pooling warmly across the paper. He writes to his father. It is so quiet here now, he writes, his pen moving slowly, thoughtfully. I went for a long walk past the perimeter fence yesterday. The farmer has already brought in the harvest. It all looks so normal. It is strange to think of the things that happened right above those very fields, while the wheat was growing. I am coming home on leave next week. I think I would just like to sit in the garden for a while, if that is all right. He seals the letter. He does not want a parade. He does not want to be called a hero. He just wants the simple, unremarkable comfort of his own garden, the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the quiet company of the people who knew him before the summer changed everything. There is a profound realization that settles over the survivors as the season turns. The boys they lost will never grow old. They will never feel the ache of winter in their bones. They will never have gray hair or sit by a fire recounting the days of their youth. They are perfectly, immaculately preserved in the golden amber of 1940. They will remain 20 years old forever, with their bright eyes, their careless laughter, and their unimaginable courage. It is left to the survivors to do the growing old for them. The pilot walks out of the mess hall and stands on the edge of the airfield. The sun is setting, casting a brilliant, fiery glow across the horizon. The sky is painted in strokes of deep violet and burning orange. He watches the light slowly fade, the shadows of the hangars stretching out to meet him. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, tarnished coin. It belonged to his friend, the friend with the bright laugh and the cherry tobacco. He had found it on the floor beneath his friend's empty bed, and he had carried it every day since. He turns the coin over in his fingers, feeling the smooth, worn edges of the metal. He looks up at the sky. It is vast, and clear, and entirely at peace. He feels the cool autumn wind brush against his face, rustling his hair. "I remember," he whispers into the quiet evening air. It is a promise. It is a vow spoken to the ghosts of the summer, carrying the weight of a lifetime. "I will always remember." He slips the coin back into his pocket, keeping it close to his heart. The stars begin to emerge, one by one, piercing the darkening canvas above. They are the same stars that watched over them during the longest, hardest nights. But tonight, they do not look cold or indifferent. They look like quiet, steady companions. The pilot turns and walks slowly back toward the warmth of the glowing windows. He carries the grief, but he also carries the immense, beautiful grace of having known them. The ghosts of the summer walk beside him in the twilight, not as a burden, but as a gentle, guiding presence. They are at peace now, resting in the quiet earth and the silent sky, leaving the boys who live to carry their light forward into all the autumns yet to come. There is a profound beauty in the way the wind carries the sound of a strange and distant language across a damp English field. If you were to step into the warm, dimly lit mess hall on a quiet evening in late summer, the first thing you would notice is the gentle, overlapping hum of voices. But it was not just the familiar, clipped tones of the southern shires, or the slow, rolling vowels of the northern counties. Woven into the thick air, mingling with the scent of roasted potatoes, damp wool, and sweet tobacco, were the sounds of entirely different worlds. There were the soft, melodic lilts of Prague, the fierce, rhythmic consonants of Warsaw, the wide, open vowels of the Canadian prairies, and the quiet, sun-baked drawl of the Australian outback. This was an island desperately defending its own shores, but the sky above it was being held up by a beautiful, intricate tapestry of strangers. Imagine a young pilot sitting by the window, the evening light painting his face in shades of bruised purple and gold. His name is written with letters that the young English mechanics stumble over, a complex arrangement of ZS and WS that feels foreign on their tongues. He is from Poland. He is slightly older than the British boys around him, and he carries a completely different kind of quiet. The young men of this island are fighting to protect their childhood gardens, their local pubs, the familiar streets where they learned to ride bicycles. But the man by the window has already watched his home fall. He is fighting for the memory of a street he can no longer walk down. He is fighting for a country that exists, for now, only in his heart. He rests a piece of thin, crinkled paper on his knee. He is writing a letter in his mother tongue. The loops and elegant lines of his handwriting are a small, defiant act of preservation. He writes to a sister he has not seen in a year, sending the letter to a forwarded address in a neutral country, hoping against hope that she is still alive to open it. He pours his sorrow, his profound homesickness, and his fierce, unbreakable pride into the blue ink. He does not know if the words will ever reach her, but the simple act of forming the letters of his home provides a fragile, vital anchor in this strange, misty land. Across the room, a young English boy, barely 19 years old, watches him. The boy holds 2 steaming, chipped mugs of tea. He walks over, his heavy flying boots scuffing softly against the floorboards. He doesn't speak Polish. The man by the window speaks only a handful of broken English phrases. But the boy simply holds out the warm mug. The older pilot looks up. He sees the exhaustion in the boy's young eyes, a mirror of his own weariness. He takes the mug, the porcelain warming his cold, ink-stained fingers. "Thank you," he whispers, the accent thick and heavy. "All right, mate," the boy replies softly, pulling up a chair to sit in comfortable, shared silence. They do not need a shared vocabulary. The offering of the tea, the quiet companionship in the fading light, the shared knowledge of what waits for them both in the freezing clouds tomorrow, this is a universal language. It is a brotherhood forged not by birthright, but by the shared, heavy burden of the sky. In another corner of the room, a pilot from Czechoslovakia is carefully sewing a tiny, embroidered emblem onto the inside lining of his heavy leather flying jacket. It is a small crest of his homeland, hidden away against his chest. These men brought the shattered pieces of their countries with them, carrying the soil of their nations in their pockets and their memories. They were exiles, fighting a lonely war in a foreign sky, sleeping in beds that were not their own, eating food that tasted strange and unfamiliar. Yet, they flew with a ferocity and a quiet grace that left the local boys in absolute awe. They were driven by a deep, complex sorrow and a burning desire to reclaim the light for a world that had been plunged into the dark. The official records and the polished newsreels of the time often smoothed over these raw, painful edges. They showed us the dashing smiles, the neat uniforms, the unified front. But the true, unvarnished reality of these displaced men was far more deeply human, filled with the profound ache of exile and the quiet tears shed in the dark when no one else was watching. To truly honor the immense depth of what these men from across the world carried, we must be willing to look past the carefully curated archives and see their unfiltered humanity. If you find yourself wanting to connect with the raw, uncensored truth of these incredibly brave men, I have put together a collection of unseen media and raw images from the war, available on Gumroad. These are the rare, genuine photographs that capture the true exhaustion, the unvarnished reality, and the deeply human faces of the diverse heroes who saved the sky. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. And then there were the boys from the vast, open spaces of the Commonwealth. Imagine a young man from the sweeping, endless wheat fields of the Canadian prairies. He grew up under a sky so immense it defied comprehension, a sky that stretched unbroken from horizon to horizon. When he arrived in England, he was utterly charmed by the tiny, patchwork fields, the winding country lanes, and the ancient, moss-covered stone walls. Everything seemed so small, so perfectly contained, shrouded in a permanent, gentle mist. He had volunteered to cross a terrifying, submarine-infested ocean, leaving behind the absolute safety of his sun-baked home. He had packed his bags, kissed his mother goodbye on a wooden porch thousands of miles away, because he understood a profound, quiet truth: if the shadow falling over these tiny, mist-shrouded islands was not stopped, it would eventually stretch across the oceans and cover the whole world. He sits on his narrow iron bed, polishing his flying goggles with a soft cloth. He thinks of the smell of the pine trees back home, the way the snow crunches underfoot in the deep winter. He misses it with a physical ache in his chest. But when he looks around the barracks, at the sleeping shapes of the boys from London, from Warsaw, from Auckland, from Prague, he knows he is exactly where he is meant to be. Out on the aerodrome, under the cover of the starry night, the ground crews work their quiet magic. A young, grease-stained mechanic is standing on a wooden crate, holding a small tin of white paint and a fine brush. He is painting a name onto the side of a freshly repaired Hurricane. It is a Czech name, full of consonants that confuse his eyes. He looks at the piece of paper in his hand, checking the spelling again and again. He paints each letter with incredibly slow, meticulous care. He may not know how to pronounce the name aloud, but he paints it with a deep, profound reverence. He knows the man who bears this name. He knows how gently he treats the machine, how he always leaves a spare cigarette on the seat as a silent thank you. The mechanic smooths the edge of a painted letter, ensuring it is perfect. In his quiet, steady brushstrokes, he is welcoming the stranger into the very middle of the island. He is making sure that when the plane rises into the morning light, it carries the true identity of the man inside. When the morning finally breaks, and the scramble bell shatters the peace, the beautiful tapestry of accents in the mess hall suddenly dissolves. They run across the damp grass, their heavy boots pounding the earth in unison. They climb into their machines. The canopies slide shut, sealing them in their lonely, glass and metal worlds. Up in the vast, freezing canvas of the sky, the differences of their berths completely vanish. At 20,000 feet, breathing the sharp, metallic taste of bottled oxygen, there are no borders. There are no passports. There is only the blinding sun, the towering white clouds, and the desperate, swirling dance of survival. Through the crackling white noise of the radio headsets, a voice breaks through. It is heavily accented, shouting a sudden, urgent warning about a shadow dropping from the sun. To the young English boy flying just a few hundred yards away, that foreign voice is the most beautiful sound in the entire world. It is the sound of a guardian angel. It is the sound of a brother. He pulls his control column hard to the side, slipping away from the danger just in time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He keys his own microphone, breathless, whispering a quick, fervent word of thanks into the static. The acknowledgement that comes back is a soft, accented chuckle, a fleeting moment of warmth suspended in the freezing void. When the patrol is over and the surviving machines drop back down through the clouds, they land on the grass as one unified force. The canopies open. The boys climb out, their legs shaky, their faces marked by the rubber masks. The Polish pilot walks over to the young Canadian. They don't say a word. They simply lean against the wing of the plane together, pulling off their leather gloves, breathing in the rich, heavy scent of the English soil. The Canadian offers a crushed packet of cigarettes. The Polish pilot takes one, striking a match and holding the small, flickering flame for them both. They stand shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the setting sun. Two young men from opposite ends of the earth, brought together by the most terrible of circumstances, finding a profound, unshakable peace and simply standing beside one another in the quiet aftermath. The night falls again, wrapping the aerodrome in a soft, protective darkness. The tapestry of names is woven securely over the sleeping fields. The letters travel slowly across the world, carrying the love of strangers back to distant homes. And in the quiet earth, the island holds them all close, whispering a gentle, endless lullaby to the boys from far away, who crossed the oceans and the borders to hold up the sky, and in doing so, found a permanent, beautiful home in the hearts of those they saved. There is a peace that comes not from forgetting, but from finally allowing the memories to rest softly upon the earth. If you were to stand on the edge of the high, white cliffs of Dover as the year drew to its close, you would feel a wind entirely swept clean of danger. The sea below, that narrow, restless stretch of water that had carried so much shadow, is simply the sea again. It crashes against the ancient chalk in a slow, rhythmic, hypnotic lullaby. The foam blows like spun silver in the fading light. The great, bruised clouds of summer have drifted away, replaced by the crisp, high, violet canopy of the approaching winter. The sun is setting, painting the cliffs in strokes of soft honey, pale rose, and deepening lavender. It is the golden hour of the year. The frantic, desperate heartbeat of the island has finally slowed. The breath that was held for so many long, terrifying months is slowly, gently being exhaled into the cooling air. In the villages nestled behind the hills, the blackout curtains are still drawn, but the people behind them sit a little differently in their armchairs. The tension that used to bunch their shoulders tight to their ears has melted away. Imagine an older woman sitting by a crackling hearth, the firelight dancing across the worn floorboards. On her lap rests a small wooden box. Inside it are the letters. They are tied together with a thin piece of cotton string. These are the letters that arrived during the height of the summer, written by a boy who lived in the sky. She unties the string. She unfolds the thin paper. The blue ink is faded now, the creases soft from being handled 100 times in the dark. She reads the words about the scruffy dog on the airfield, and the burnt toast, and the cold morning dew. When she read them months ago, they were desperate lifelines, proof that her boy was still breathing. But tonight, she reads them differently. The fear is gone. The words are no longer a shield against the terror, they are simply a beautiful, fragile record of his love. She traces his name with a gentle, withered finger. Her boy came home. He is sleeping in the room upstairs, the deep, heavy sleep of a youth returned. She folds the letter, tucks it back into the box, and closes the lid with a soft, final click. Out on the aerodromes, the world has grown incredibly quiet. The first frost of the year has arrived, painting the grassy runways in a delicate, sparkling white. The canvas dispersal tents, once filled with the smell of damp wool, spilled tea, and nervous sweat, have been taken down. The wooden huts are locked. The great hangars are mostly empty, echoing only with the sound of the wind rattling the corrugated iron roofs. A single mechanic, a man whose hands are permanently stained with the oil and grease of 100 midnight repairs, walks slowly across the frozen grass. His breath plumes in the cold air. He stops where the planes used to wait for the scramble bell. He looks down at the earth. The deep ruts carved by the heavy, rolling wheels of the Hurricanes and Spitfires are still there, frozen into the soil. They are scars upon the earth, beautiful reminders of the heavy lifting that was done here. He remembers the boys. He remembers the way they looked when they climbed down from the wings, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, their hands trembling so violently they could not strike a match. He remembers patting their shoulders, tightening their harnesses, sending them up into the unknown. He stands in the quiet, frozen field, and he bows his head. He does not weep. He simply offers a profound, silent wave of gratitude to the empty sky. The machines are resting now. The canvas and the wood have done their job. The silence of the engines is the most beautiful music he has ever heard. For the boys who flew, the transition into the quiet aftermath is a slow, delicate journey. Picture a young man, dressed in a thick winter coat, walking alone down a country lane. The trees on either side are bare, their dark branches reaching up like delicate lacework against the fading twilight. The air is so still he can hear the crunch of a single dry leaf beneath his boot. He stops and looks up at the sky. It is vast. It is empty. For so long, he looked at that blue canvas and saw a battlefield. He saw shadows, blinding sunglares, and the terrifying, winking lights of tracer fire. He remembers the breathtaking isolation of 20,000 feet, the hiss of the oxygen mask, the bone-deep cold that seemed to freeze time itself. But as he looks up now, the sky is just a sky. The first stars are beginning to prick through the deepening velvet of the twilight. They are cold, distant, and utterly peaceful. He realizes, with a profound, settling warmth in his chest, that the ghosts of the summer are resting. The friends who did not fly back, the boys who left their empty chairs in the mess hall and their half-read books on their pillows, they are no longer suspended in the violent air. They have become a part of the quiet earth, a part of the wind in the trees, a part of the very freedom that allows him to walk down this quiet lane without fear. He feels a deep, enduring grace. He will carry their memories with him for the rest of his life. He will live the years they were denied. He will marry, he will have children, he will sit in gardens and listen to the rain, and in every beautiful, ordinary moment of his long life, he will carry a small, glowing ember of their spirit. He smiles, a soft, weary, deeply grateful smile, and continues his walk into the gathering dusk. These stories of quiet resilience, of ordinary people holding up the sky with their courage and their love, are the true treasures of our history. They are not found in the cold lists of dates and numbers, but in the tear-stained letters, the swept pavements, and the shared cups of lukewarm tea in the dark. Weaving these fragile threads together, carefully brushing the dust off these deeply human moments, is a labor of pure love. It takes countless hours of quiet care, sitting in the archives of the past, to ensure these gentle echoes are never lost to the wind. If you find comfort and peace in these journeys back in time, and if you would like to support the immense dedication it takes to craft these stories, I have a small tip jar over on Ko-Fi. Even the smallest gesture is like a gentle hand on the shoulder, helping to keep this channel alive and ensuring these memories are passed down to the next generation. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the last light finally fades over the white cliffs, the island wraps itself in the absolute, comforting dark of a winter night. In the deep, subterranean plotting rooms, the great wooden map is completely clear. The women who watch the sky have taken off their heavy headsets. The constant, crackling static of danger has been replaced by the soft hum of the ventilation fans. Alice, who moved the wooden blocks with trembling hands, is walking home through the snow. She catches a snowflake on her woolen mitten. She looks at its perfect, intricate geometry before it melts. She thinks of the immense, unimaginable scale of what they all just survived, and how it all comes down to this, the simple, breathtaking privilege of standing in the snow, entirely safe. The cities, with their scarred stone and their shattered windows, are sleeping. The baker has set his dough to prove for the morning. The postman has hung his heavy leather satchel on its hook. The mother has tucked her child into a warm bed, leaving the door cracked open just a sliver to let in the light from the hallway. There are no sirens waiting to tear the night apart. There is only the gentle, rhythmic breathing of a world at rest. The legacy of these few short months is not a monument of bronze or marble. It is not a triumphant arch or a captured flag. The true legacy of the few, the boys in the air, the women underground, the mechanics in the hangars, and the families holding their breath in the cellars, is this quiet night. It is the unbroken silence. It is the ability to close your eyes without fear. Look out your own window for a moment. Look at the sky above your home. It is the exact same sky they looked at. It is the same moon that shone down on the aerodromes and the dark, restless waters of the channel. But because of their unimaginable endurance, because of the tea stains and the scrambles, because of the letters in the drawer and the weight of the wings, that sky is a canopy of peace. They bought our tomorrows with their todays. They took the terror of the heavens onto their own shoulders so that we could walk upon the earth with our heads held high. The stars are shining brilliantly now. They are scattered across the vast, dark blue ocean of the night, steady and enduring. Let their gentle light wash over you. Let the incredible quiet of this history settle deep into your bones, soothing away the worries of your own day. The story is told. The storm has passed. The sky is safe. Take a slow, deep breath of the cool night air. Let your shoulders drop. Let your heart slow its rhythm to match the quiet ticking of the clock. You are held in the long, peaceful shadow of their courage. There is nothing left to fear. Close your eyes. Rest now, wrapped in the profound and beautiful quiet they left behind. Sleep well, and let the gentle night carry you safely toward the dawn.